The scene begins with a person sinking deeper and deeper into the water until he disappears from view, as if he was watching his life movie while sinking until he reaches a place in the deep sea within hourglass. A historical painting appears and a story is told about the beginning of the world and how the mana that makes up the world was too stubborn to keep its shape and rolled around in a muddy mass of chaos until the first god appeared and ordered the mana to form the earth, which took a solid form and became the earth under his feet, and the mana that remained in the air formed the sky. The voice then interrupted a child named William to ask him about the relationship between words and magic, but the voice of a being named Gus told him to listen to the rest of the story. As he continues, God begins to create everything around him, and while he is telling the story, it turns out that Gus is an old ghost, but his features suggest that he is very intelligent and is responsible for teaching this child everything he needs to know. After Gus finished his story, he said that words, whether spoken or written, have power. He wrote Agnes, who turned into fire in front of them because she represented the presence of fire, and explained that magic lies in the power of words and how to use them. After that, William went out of his room and walked among the huge statues of all the gods that existed in the past until he came to a plaque with the ancient magic words given to the gods and looked at the statue above it, which was of the goddess Grayskull. Then a girl named Mary came over and asked him if he was curious about the statue and began to tell him that Grayskull is the god of light who governs the cycle of death and rebirth, and is the son of the Earth God Volt and the Earth Mother Mater. He then asked her who she worshipped, and she told him that she worshipped Earth Mother Mater. She then told him about the goddess of child rearing and the bounty of the earth, and that she was valued and respected as one of the 6 goddesses among the people of the rural areas. After a while, a skeletal figure with red hair walked in, and William called him Blood. He was holding a wild boar in his hand, and William was delighted when he saw him bringing a boar for dinner and ran over to him. After that, they all sat down to dinner, but William was enjoying the food very much, and Blood said that when he grew up, he would teach him to hunt, because hunting teaches a person many lessons in life, including the need to learn how to kill creatures. Mary told Blood that William was too young for something like that, and Gus agreed with her that he should learn the basics first, that he couldn't believe that William could read and write when he was only 3 years old, and that if he learned magic, it would help him in his life. But Blood didn't agree with this idea, and feared that he would grow up to be an old fool like Gus. They argued about William's future, who went back to finish eating and asked Mary how she baked bread. But Mary refused to tell him because it was a secret, and the 3 creatures always keep secrets from William, and understood that that was why they were living with him in this place. William asked himself, why do I only know the 3 of them from the time I was born, and why do they look like zombies? William thought back to some of his fuzzy memories of his past life, and that this was a secret he had kept from them, that he was alive before he was with them in another world before he died and came to theirs, and that he was also hiding a secret from them. The first time William saw Blood, he was afraid of what he looked like and wanted to throw up. Then he saw Mary in her mummy-like form and the ghost Gus, and thought they were going to kill him, but they turned out fine. 6 months after he was born, Mary came in one day with a bowl of soup and ate it, and he was happy. And at that time, William could not speak as a child, but he understood what she was saying, and then Mary picked him up, and they went out for a walk, and it was the first time William went outside and saw the sun and the plants, and was relieved because he thought he was going to hell and would be judged after the miserable life he had lived in the world, and felt that this was a second chance for him from God to make up for all that he had missed, and decided that this time he would live the life he wished for. After a while, William grew up, and when he was 8 years old, he threw himself on the ground from fatigue after Blood was physically training him in fitness and building muscles to become a strong person. William asked him if skill should compensate for strength, and Blood said that skill alone is not enough because it is not always useful and must be combined with strength to survive. Then he went to Gus to learn magic and learn how to write the word Agnes of Fire, but it exploded too much, and Gus told him to control his accuracy because when he wrote it, he said the flame of Agnes, and that's why it exploded in his face, and said that he would start teaching him how to use secondary magic and focus on accuracy. When William asked Gus what he meant, Gus said that he knew how to get money, and William was frustrated that even the world was running on money. Gus said that he could solve all his problems with money instead of magic, and while Gus was excited to talk to William, William was frustrated and disgusted at the thought of having to go after money in this world again. At night, Mary was telling William about the monsters in their world. She had a book with pictures of them and what they looked like, and she was teaching him about their types, and that demonic monsters were the most vicious type. Mary told him about the story of the 3 of them and how they were human before they died and were born in this world and had to make a deal with the god of the undead, which made them traitors in the eyes of the gods, and William knew they were human like him and knew why they looked different from him. The next day, William was practicing hunting with Blood and managed to catch a bird, but it was still alive in his hands. and Blood said to break its neck and not let it live in pain. William did this because he didn't like killing, and Blood said that he didn't like killing any living thing either, but he had to do it in order to eat and live. After that, he stood in front of Blood and Gus, and Blood decided that he had to start training at a harder level, and gave him a sword to face him with. But William was afraid because he was fine without Blood hitting him, but now he would have to dodge Blood's blows himself. But Blood assured him that he was just a bone, and that he would not be hurt by his blows. Blood explains that this is the reason why he learned magic and martial arts at the same time, so that he can defend himself in more than one way. Blood starts attacking William with his sword, and William tries to dodge his blows and use his magical abilities. And although he was able to trap Blood with the oil word, Blood was able to cut the spider webs that William was trying to catch him with. When William attacked, the sword flew out of William's hand, and he was left unarmed, and Blood warned him not to close his eyes while fighting. Afterward, the three of them sat down, and Blood said that he had a long way to go to become a warrior, but that he was impressed with his abilities and that his style was similar to Gus, who had long ago slayed monsters, rediscovered ancient languages, and was known as the Ogre of War, and encouraged him to continue his training and build up his strength. Gus was going to tell him about when they met William when he was first born and how he didn't care for him, and then thought he'd teach him magic and make him his apprentice, when Blood interrupted him to make sure he didn't say anything William didn't need to know. As they drove back at night, Blood asked William if he noticed that he was different from the three of them. William said he did, and Blood said that there were many things he needed to explain to him about this subject, but he couldn't do it right now, and promised him that when he was older, he would tell him everything. William lived with Blood, Gus, and Mary as his new family, with Gus teaching him magic and lessons, Blood teaching him to fight, and Mary teaching him how to live and adapt to the world, as well as farming. William knew about Mary's prayer, that she secluded herself in the temple dome once a day, and that no one was allowed to enter as long as she was there. After William collected the vegetables and went to train with Blood, he came back, unable to lift his arms from fatigue, when he saw Mary walking with a tray of bread out of the temple, which aroused William's curiosity, and he went after her. When William opened the gate through which Mary entered, he saw her standing there with a great aura, and William felt that she was going to die and felt a sense of loss that he had never felt in his life. So he ran after her, and when he touched her, his hand burned, and he called for Gus and Blood until he fainted. Then they all took him to his bed and bandaged his hand. Mary regretted that she had kept her secret all this time, and Blood apologized to her that he should have thought that William would not see anything. When William woke up, the first thing he did was ask for Mary, and Mary apologized to him, but William told her that she was not at fault, and that it was his fault for following his curiosity. And then Blood said that he would not do anything more without permission from him or Mary. And when Gus saw that William was not afraid of the fire and ran to save him, he told him what he wanted to do. Mary told him what he wanted to know and said that this bread was a gift from Mater, the Earth Mother. He asked Mary why she was burning, and Mary told him that she burned because she betrayed Mater by making a deal with the god of the living dead, who is Mater's enemy, and that's why when she comes into contact with it, she burns. William asked her if she prayed in the dome all this time for him, and she told him that praying to her mother is a daily habit that she has been doing since before she knew him. But even if it makes her feel pain, she considers it her punishment and endures it in the hope that the Earth Mother will forgive her one day, and it is enough for her that the Earth Mother gives her bread every day because of him. So William asked her to let him pray with her in the dome because he wants to feel and understand what Mary feels every day and understand it. After a while, William was 13 years old and Gus was telling him about the age of war between the gods and how it started. William asked him about the statues in the temple, and Gus told him about the legend of the battle that took place between Volt, the god of lightning, and his brother, the war god Trit, and Volt was able to banish Trit to the depths of the earth with the help of Mater, although Trit had the advantage over him all the time. Gus continued that the god of war stayed underground planning how to get revenge on Volt, and then William asked him if this story was just a myth and explained his view of the world, which made Gus admire him and his intelligence even more. And he told William that Volt is the good god and Trit is the evil god. But if the system goes wrong, Volt will remain evil, and if they succeed in getting rid of him, it will give Trit a chance to remain a good god, which is the concept of good and evil gods. After that, William sat among the statues of the gods and prayed the silent prayer, which is to train his mind to focus on the present and not to think about the past or the future. And after some time, Mary beat him with the bell in her hand and said that he had already spent 5 days praying the silent prayer. Even though it had been 5 years since his hands were burned, he chose to keep the scars on his hands and not let Mary see them because Blood said they were a sign of his manhood. Then he went to Gus, who gave him 3 books and told him to finish them before tomorrow, and he read all night. and each time Gus gave him more and more books. At the same time, he continued his training with Blood and his prayers with Mary until one day, Blood brought William a demon corpse from the ruins to practice on, and the demon had a sword and started attacking William, but William was able to defeat the demon with one blow, and Blood was surprised by William's abilities and said that they would try something harder next time. Blood and William went to the ruined city, which was the first time William had ever seen it from the hill since he was reborn, and entered an underground passageway, and Blood said that this is where humans and dwarves used to live, but now it's a dangerous area where the living dead live. Then they stood up and Blood made sure William had everything he needed. Then he told him to get out of here immediately. William was surprised by his words, but Blood said he would find him by land and that he must run or he would die. William used the light magic on his armor to illuminate the corridor, and suddenly he saw two zombies holding weapons and approaching him. So he drew his sword and stood facing them and defeated them easily. William thought that Blood meant to test William's stamina, but even though William had everything he needed, he was worried about being alone in a place like this, and he felt that their training would become more difficult because he would be independent after 15 years, and he decided to pass this test to prove to them that he could stand on his own. After walking for a while, he saw the skeleton of an animal standing with a spear and realized it was the demon Frascus. He thought about the best way to get past him, either by sneaking around or confronting him, but in the end he decided to confront him and not be afraid and stood in front of them. As soon as Frascus saw him, he attacked him with his wand and William dodged his blow. Frascus tried to use a magical ability, but William cancelled it with a reverse ability and ran at him and hit him with his sword, but the sword broke on Frascus's brain. William was surprised that his sword broke from the blow, but when he saw Frascus, he saw that his head had crumbled and was completely transformed into debris. But in return, William lost his weapon and remained with the armor. But he took Frascus's spear and discovered that it was a magical spear for dwarves, and took it to continue his journey. After William walked for a while, he felt a current of air and thought he was near the exit. And when he walked in the direction of the current and thought that Blood knew the history of this place, he began to ask himself where his parents had left him in this world and why he was the only human left living in this world. William tried to talk to him, but Gus didn't respond to him and kept on shouting at him. While William was talking to him, Gus uttered the word "wake up," and after he said it, a monster came out of the underground. William called him Golem and started to attack him, but William dodged his blow and realized that Gus was taking it seriously. So William decided to confront the monster. When he saw magic words written on the monster's body, he hit it with a spear, and the monster turned into a pile of stone. But even after it crumbled, the stones still attacked William, and Gus tried to set a trap for William from the spider's web, and William dodged all the attacks until he fell into the oil magic. Gus tries to hit William with his magical abilities, but William negates them all and asks himself why Gus has gone so far in his training and is surprised that Gus wrote 3 magic words at the same time. When William realized that death was near, he decided to confront Gus and use the spear in his hand to kill him, but he stopped himself at the last moment and asked him why he wanted to kill him and said that he couldn't kill him no matter what, and if he was going to kill him, he didn't mind. Gus finally spoke up and apologized for going a little overboard with the day's training, but William was shocked that Gus was trying to convince him that this was a lesson because he felt that Gus really wanted to kill him. After returning to the temple, Mary was happy to find a weapon like the magic dwarf spear in the ruined city, and William was focused on Gus, but he didn't say anything about their underground fight, and William decided that he didn't want to do anything to them either. After that, William learned from Gus that the spear is called the Pale Moon, that the words of creation are engraved on the spear's head and the mast, and that the spear can emit light magic and can be used to distract enemies or as a light source in dark places, and the words written on the mast allow him to control the length of the spear as he likes, and William felt happy with the idea of having his own magical weapon. Over time, William got into the habit of going to the underground city every once in a while to master Blood's training, taking a sword with him and going down to collect any equipment or weapons he could find, and over time it became easy for him. One day, Gus said he wasn't going to give him any more books to read because he had gained the knowledge he needed, and that the training would be to go down to the underground city to collect coins. And when William returned, he realized that Gus had done this to play with him and teach him gambling, but William was upset and refused to learn something like that. Gus tried to convince him that gambling is used for hours in fights between wizards, and they began to tease him that he was afraid to play Gus because he would lose, and finally William agreed to play him. Even though William lost every round to Gus, he didn't give up and kept trying until Mary walked in and asked them what they were doing. Blood and Gus got confused and tried to come up with a lie until she ordered them to sit on the floor in front of her and gave them a long lecture that they would never play gambling again. Gus then told William that when the winter solstice comes, he will be 15 years old and will undergo a rite of passage. He told him that before that, he will have to face Blood in a sword fight, and William promised him that he would do his best to beat Blood, but Gus asked him to lose to Blood so that Blood doesn't feel like he's losing on purpose. William asked him why, but Gus couldn't tell him, so William asked him why he always kept a secret or information from him and didn't tell him anything he needed to know, and that if he explained the reason, he wouldn't refuse to lose for him. But Gus apologized and said he couldn't tell him anything, and William refused Gus' request and walked out of the room. Mary told him that when he goes through his initiation ritual, he's supposed to choose which god to worship. He asked them to advise him which god to worship. Mary told him that the god he follows the most is the god of lightning, so he asked her if she worships Mater, Blood worships the god of fire, Blaze, and Gus worships the god of wind, Whirl. Blood explained that he swore to Blaze to train every day and stay strong. Mary swore to Mater to live a life where her will and desire are respected, and Gus swore to Whirl to do what he wants and enjoy his life, and Blood advised him to swear from his heart to gain divine protection, and not to swear if he is angry or excited. And William began to think about which god to swear to. One day after William finishes training, Blood brings him some of his favorite drink, honey grape juice, and offers to let them sit and drink it. Blood starts thinking that William's cousin is 15 years old and will be a grown man, and that honey grape juice is a secret between them that they can't tell Mary about. After they got drunk, Blood took him and said he was going to test his courage, but William felt like the world was spinning out of control until they got to Mary's room and Blood opened the door a crack and watched Mary change her clothes. But William lost his balance and went into Mary's room and fell on the floor. The next morning, William woke up with Mary's pen marked on his face. When he woke up, he thought about what happened yesterday and decided not to drink anymore. When the day of his 15th birthday arrived, William was preparing for his fight against Blood, thinking that after he was done, he would lead the temple in the spring, but he couldn't forget the request that Gus had made to him. His thoughts were interrupted by Mary, who was carrying the armor that William would wear to prepare for the fight, and asked him if he had chosen which god to worship. But William told her that he was still thinking about it and said that he would win against Blood today. When they reached the hill, Blood was ready and thought about the rules of the fight. No magic, no attempts at direct killing, defeat by either withdrawal or inability to continue fighting, and if one of them was injured, Mary would be able to heal him. William prepared, drew his sword, and began to attack Blood, and they preferred to duel each other with swords, and William tried to block Blood's attacks with his shield, and William was careful not to hit him, so he preferred to continue, and suddenly William threw a small blade at Blood to distract him, then ran and tried to attack him, but Blood was able to easily block his blow. William thought of a plan that would allow him to get close to Blood without hitting him. William used his armor to pin Blood's sword to the ground and put his weight on Blood, knocking him to the ground. When William tried to hit Blood with his sword, Blood caught it and threw it away while holding William's sword between his ribs. William surrendered and thought that he could beat him because of his muscles, but Mary scolded him and told him not to use the trick of holding his opponent's weapon between his ribs, but he argued that his body has no vital organs like humans, so he had no other choice. To William's surprise, Blood was using this trick as a human and died because of Mary's help, and Mary decided to fight with him so that he could use this trick again against William. Then Blood explained to William that losing the fight would not change anything, and William promised him that he would win the next time, and Blood said that if he had a knockout blow or a secret technique, he could teach him, and William was surprised that Blood did not have these things, and Blood said that they were different from each other, and that all he was thinking about was that William would not look like him. Then Blood gave him a weapon as a sign of his adulthood and independence, which is the most powerful blade of the demon blades that Blood possesses, called Off-Eater, which can cut and destroy any enemy, even if it is a god. Blood explained to him the characteristics of the weapon, that it gives the bearer life energy with each blow to any living being, and warned him not to use the weapon too much, so that it does not affect his personality and makes him feel overconfident in himself. He then told Blood that he would tell him about the history of the weapon, and tell him what they had been hiding all these years, as he had promised, and began to tell him about a demon king known as the High Immortal King who tried to conquer this continent 200 years ago, at which time there were demon kings and leaders in all the villages of the world. They were able to offer corpses and blood and rituals to their god, the god of dimensions, and the followers of the god of war, Trin, and the god of the living dead, Stagnant, were still spread all over the world. Blood said that the map he had learned from Gus was not the same at the time of the Great War. He continued that all they knew about the period was that the High King had wreaked havoc on their continent, and that one of his abilities was that he could turn the blood he shed into infinite numbers of his own soldiers, and that he had created an army of demons, and that nothing could affect him except swords and his own overeater. He tells him that the ruined city was a vital transportation hub across the lake, but it was destroyed a few days after the Demon King invaded and remained his residence, where he was able to create a huge amount of demons. And just when everyone was sure that the continent would be completely destroyed, Gus, known as the Wandering Sage, decided that it was the right time to get rid of him. William began analyzing the situation and connecting the dots, and discovered that Gus wanted to locate the king, enter underground with a small number of soldiers, and steal his sword in battle because it was impossible to kill him because of the abilities of the Overeater blade, but when they stole it, they could kill him. Because of this, Gus used great magic to exterminate his followers so that he could face the king face to face and conclude that they could kill him, but Blood said that he could not kill the king because he would reveal his true identity and could not even touch him, and all that supported him in the battle was Gus's magic and Mary's blessing. To this day, Blood asks himself what was missing to be able to kill the High Demon King, and Mary tells him that when they realized they were doomed, she and Gus sealed him and banished him deep underground. And then an echo from the followers of the god Stagnant came down, and that's when Gus, Mary, and Blood made a deal with Stagnant because he saw their talent and power and offered to turn them into zombies and stay on his side. He would then vanquish all the demons, give them immortal bodies, control the seal of banishment, and prevent the Demon King from reappearing forever. The three agreed to the deal because they had no other choice, and then Stagnant fulfilled his promise and began to cleanse the entire city, turning low-ranking demons into undead and remaining the protectors of the king's seal of banishment. The three of them thought about the possibility that all humans had died and the world was devoid of living beings until they met William as a baby. William discovered that he had been with the demons before he met Blood, and that they wanted to sacrifice him in order to break the seal of the High King. But when Blood and Mary defeated the demons, they took William with them. When they went to Gus, he was reluctant to be with them, but Mary and Blood insisted that they raise him. Blood said that they had raised and trained him all these years so that they didn't know where he was coming from, and if there was any danger he could overcome with his strength and skills. William decided that the first thing he would do when he reached the city and overcame all the obstacles that stood in his way was to bring his family and friends and populate the land with humans. Mary told him to always do good and keep praying to his God, and Blood told him to stay strong no matter what. They said goodbye before a black cloud formed over them, turning day into night, and the god Stagnant descended, ordering them to give him their souls after they had accomplished their mission with William. William refused to accept what was happening, but at the same time he could not move or speak, and when Stagnant was about to destroy them and take their lives, Gus stood in front of him and told William to take Blood and Mary and run away to a distant place. Gus tried to bind Stagnant using his magical abilities and formed chains around the god, who surrounded himself with a circular barrier to protect himself from Gus's attack, who used all his strength to protect his friends and used all his magical abilities, and created a strong windstorm around Stagnant, who could not resist and disappeared. Then Gus reassured Mary and Blood that their souls were still in their bodies. While Gus was talking to William, Mary, and Blood, they were surprised to find that Gus had been torn in half by a sudden attack from the undead god, and then attacked Blood and Mary and took their essence. Stagnant appeared out of nowhere and grabbed Gus by the beard, admiring his strength as a magician, and after he finished talking to him, he threw him aside and headed towards William, who was standing there, shocked by what was happening around him, while Blood and Mary tried to fight back. Stagnant was telling William that it was all thanks to him and that he wanted to thank him for making sure that Blood and Mary would finally be able to serve him forever, and that because of him, their bond was weakened and they were easier to destroy. But reality hit him, and Stagnant offered to join his army so that he could continue his life with Gus, Blood, and Mary. He said he would hear his decision tomorrow when the winter solstice was complete and the sun had lost all its power. At night, William returned with Blood, Mary, and Gus. When he reached the temple, he held them close and thought about the 15 years he had lived with them and understood why Gus acted the way he did when he tried to kill him and when he asked him to lose to Blood on purpose, and that all this was so that they would not lose their connection to the High King, and that all these years he had grown up with the pain and suffering of Gus and the sacrifice of Blood and Mary for him. William thought about his old life and how he couldn't repay his parents before they died, and now his tragedy was repeating itself because it was impossible for a worthless person to die and be reborn in a better life. The next day, William woke up and found Mary, Blood, and Gus still alive. He didn't know if this was a dream or reality, but he apologized to them for what had happened to them because of him, and Blood said that they were paying for what they had done in their old lives and that he didn't have to apologize for something that was not his fault, and that Gus had tried to defend them and stop Stagnant but had failed. They thought that if the three of them united, they could stop the other demons, and William sensed that they were pretending to be strong in front of him, so he wouldn't argue with them and told him it was time to walk out of the temple and use what they taught him over the years. William decides to tell them the secret he's been hiding, that he has memories of his old life, that he was a worthless person, and that when he was reborn, he thought it was a chance to live a good life and make up for what he couldn't do, but he caused their suffering without realizing it. He told them that when his parents died back then, he doesn't know if he felt anything or not, and that he was still a worthless person because he couldn't repay them after all that. But Mary hit him with a pen and assured him that it wasn't true, that his self-esteem was shaken by Stagnet's words, and that as long as he could feel all these emotions, he was a normal person. They all tried to encourage him to stop beating himself up over the past and focus on the present. He told them that he was still responsible for protecting them. He then prayed to the gods and asked them to give him protection because he was fighting an evil god. He then left the temple and met Stagnet, who was waiting for him to make his decision. William said that he rejected his offer and decided to stand up to him and confront him, but Stagnet surprised him by realizing that he knew his plan and was trying to restrain him by focusing all his attention on him alone, and yet he still went along with his plan for the other and thought that he would challenge a god, and the first would have to prove that he was up to the challenge. Suddenly, Stagnet sees zombies rising from the ground and realizes that Blood, Mary, and Gus have buried their allies there. He faces them alone with his spear and shield and keeps knocking them down one by one with his quick attacks and magical abilities. One of them managed to shoot him in the leg, but William resisted and stood up to block them, but Stagnet stopped them and said that he was impressed with him and that he had exceeded his expectations. When he asked him again about his decision, he tried to tempt him by saying that he would make him the leader of the undead army if he agreed and would free his body from death and live forever with his family Gus, Blood, and Mary. William was almost convinced by Stagnet's words and his intention to create a world without death, suffering, and loss. Then Stagnet cut himself with a blade and asked William to drink his blood, and that if he did so, he would be immortal. When William approached him hesitant, he drew his sword that Blood Overeater had given him and cut off Stagnet's hand, and then attacked him with a blow that restored his health and healed the wounds he had sustained. Just as William was about to kill him with a final blow, a snake emerged from his severed hand, grabbed William by the leg, knocked him off balance, and by order of the undead god, bit him and knocked him unconscious. When William woke up, he found himself in a pool of water and felt that the place was not strange to him, as if he had been there before, and then he saw the goddess of light holding a lantern and approaching him, and he thought he had walked in this place before with her. When William looked up to the sky, he saw a bunch of planets. When he asked her about the light, she told him that they were just passing spirits who traveled between worlds to prevent everything from stagnating. Then she asked him about his refusal of Stagnet's offer, and he told her that in his previous life, he was completely resigned, and if he fell, he wouldn't try to get up again, and death didn't matter to him. That's why he decided to live his life diligently in the world he was reborn into, and felt that if he lived his life properly, he would die proud of himself, and that if he accepted Stagnet's offer to become immortal, it would be like going back to a life of failure and surrender. After that, William asked her to live and die as part of the family of Gus, Blood, and Mary, and the goddess of light asked him if he understood the attraction of life and was ready to accept death, and William told her that he accepted his fate. And William held the hand of the goddess of light, Graystill, and she granted his wish and asked him to wake up and kiss her, and then their paths would remain the same until he died, and she would be his protector and goddess. William woke up on the battlefield and found Stagnet still standing. He swore to worship Graceville and asked her to be by his side. Stagnet was surprised that he was calling out to her and that she would never be his equal. Stagnet was surprised at the size of the aura around him for his age, and when William took his oath to the god of light, he thought of Blood's words that the stronger his oath, the easier it would be to gain, but he would suffer more hardships in return. But William decided to give his life to the god of light, Graceville, and swore that he would be her sword that would destroy evil and receive divine protection from her. Stagnet was devastated because he had hoped that William would join his army, and he had no choice but to kill him and ordered his army to kill him. But William was able, with one stroke of his sword combined with the power of the divine flame, to wipe out Stagnet's entire army, and when Stagnet approached to attack him, he was able to escape before William could hit him. William remained standing at attention, waiting for him to come back to kill him with one blow, and then he felt a hand touching him and did not turn around to see Graceville guiding him to where he should go. And when he looked, he saw her looking in the direction of the temple, so William realized that Stagnet was heading to the temple to save his family and ran towards the temple as fast as he could to catch up with them and save them from death. When William arrives at the temple, he realizes that Stagnet is there and time is running out to save them. Just as Stagnet is about to take the souls of Blood, Mary, and Gus, a bright aura appears in the place, and when Mary looks in its direction, she sees Earth Mother Mater, and Mary realizes that Earth Mother has forgiven her for protecting her from death William took advantage of the time Mater gave him and used the power of the god of light, Grayskull. Instead of attacking Stagnant with it, he aimed it at Blood and Mary to gain the divine flame, but Stagnant intercepted the power before it could reach them with a counterattack. William used his acceleration ability to go as fast as he could. When Stagnant saw him, he was going to use a magic ability, but Gus beat him to it and used an ability that made him unable to speak. William was able to stab Stagnant with the Overeater sword and beat him with the sword in rapid succession until his body was broken and he began to fade away. William swore to Grayskull that he would never be like Stagnant and that he would live a straight life until he died. After he was sure that the danger was over, he sat on the ground and breathed a sigh of relief and realized that thanks to the sword that Blood had given him, the magic he had learned from Gus, and the prayer he had learned from Mary, he could defeat an entity like Stagnant. Gus says that it's only natural for him to be as strong as he is because he's the son of Blood and Mary. Blood suggests that they celebrate William's puberty and victory over Stagnant, and Gus offers to drink a drink made by the dwarves, but Mary warns them not to drink too much like last time. When Blood and Mary get up, they can't move from their place and feel that this could be their punishment for losing their bond and refusing to sell their souls to the god of the undead. Blood tells William that this is the end of them and that they are doomed. William is shocked and frustrated because he thought he had finally saved them and that they would live with him forever, but now there's nothing he can do for them. After Blood and Mary tell him that this is the way of life and that fathers must die before sons, William accepts this reality, but he still tries to ask them to live anyway because he feels that he would be lost without them. Blood and Mary told him not to think selfishly in situations like this, that even after they die, people can live in peace as long as they eat and sleep, and that no matter what happens, his life won't stop and he will meet many things and people along the way. Mary warned him that after he swore to the god of light and killed Stagnant, he would begin to face hardships in his life and go through difficult periods, and that he should not be affected by this and should prefer to love people, do good, not be afraid of loss, and be a source of joy in times of distress. Then Mary hugged him and caressed him until he saw a ghost coming out of their bodies, and William saw what they looked like when they were human through it. Then Gus came back with the drink, and they partied all night, and after they fell asleep, Grayskull appeared and took their souls and returned them to the cycle of death and rebirth. The next day, William buried the bodies of Blood and Mary at the top of the hill, where he used to stop and talk to them when he was young. He told them that from time to time he would come to talk to them and tell them about his journey, and when he had family and friends, he would bring them to recognize them. Then Gus came to him to say goodbye, and William asked him if he wanted to live, and Gus accused him of wishing death to an old man. William said that he was hoping to inherit his treasure after he died, so Gus took a sack out of his pocket and gave it to William with the treasure in it, and asked him to grow it and benefit from it. Then Gus explains that he died because he made a deal with Grayskull to stay 10 years until Stagnant regains his strength, and William is surprised that Stagnant is still coming back one day. And when William asks him why Blood and Mary weren't part of the deal, Gus says they refused because if they lived longer, they would get greedy and refuse to die every time. As they walked down the hill, William asked Gus what he would do with the seal in 10 years, and Gus said that he would find out in time, and that William had used a great deal of his power to get Grayskull to intervene on their behalf, and because of that, the future of the light god depended on William's efforts. William realized that one of the troubles he was destined to endure was that he had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. After they returned to the temple, William began to prepare himself for the journey, packing everything he would need for the journey. On the way, Gus asked him if he might need a nickname, and suggested that he give him a new name since Blood and Mary had named him William. He suggested that he keep his name Mariblood, which was a combination of Mary and Blood's names, and it became William Mariblood. William liked the name and was happy to have something to think about all the time, and he told Gus that he would take the first letter of his name as a middle name before he said goodbye to him and left to start his journey as a knight. After 200 years, William is on his own and faces many difficulties on his journey, killing many demons along the way, but he was able to eliminate them easily because he was trained by Blood, Mary, and Gus, and because he killed a zombie god himself, it was not difficult for him to face a group of demons. William took a walk in a forest until it rained, and he sat under a roof to keep warm until the rain stopped, and he resumed his journey until he reached an abandoned city where he explored and prayed to the god of light to grant peace and guidance to the lost souls in the city, and Grayskull answered his prayers. At night, William pitched a tent for himself and built a wood fire to keep him warm. He thought that the food he had was almost gone, but he could get bread by praying to Grayskull, asking for her blessing, and purifying the water so that he could drink it in the hope that he would reach a place with people nearby. The next morning, William chose to walk towards the river in order to reach the place he wanted, and suddenly he heard a sound coming from the forest, and as soon as he took out his spear, A wild boar appeared and attacked William, but he managed to kill him with one blow, and when he focused on him, he saw that he was hit by an arrow, and he looked at him and saw a person holding a bow and arrow. William decided to try to talk to him and prove to him that he was not a threat, especially since he had no identification and spoke to him in Elvish. He asked him if he was an elf, but William said he realized that he was the one who belonged to them, so he spoke to him in Elvish. The man came down, revealed his face, and asked William if he was the one who killed the pig, saying that it was his prey and William had stolen it from him. William tried to apologize, but he was going to make a mistake and say it the way he used to apologize in his old life, so he caught himself and kept quiet and justified that he had to kill it because it attacked him, and William tried to negotiate with him, and the elf agreed to give him the pig's shoulder in exchange for helping him slaughter it. After they hung the pig, he gave William the right shoulder, then they gathered some wood to make a fire, and William pretended to be a magician and pretended to start the fire by rubbing the wood together, and they began to prepare their meal. After they finished their meal and packed their things, William asked the elf which way to go to get to the nearest populated city. And when the elf asked him where he lived, William had to tell him that he came from the south. The elf said that there was no other south because they were at the southernmost point of the monster forest. But William insisted on his answer that he came from the south and asked him if he was one of the adventurers who searched for treasures among the ancient ruins. William said he was one of them and that he got lost on his way. So Elf told him that he preferred to go downstream, and after a day he would reach a small town. William asked if their path would allow him to take a break in the place where he lived, but the elf refused, saying he didn't want to get into trouble with him, and William understood what he wanted to say. William asked if he would know how to walk in the dark. The elf said a spell that illuminated the forest after sunset by little fairies. William liked to know his name before he walked and introduced himself. The elf said his name was Meneldur. At night, after William camped by the river, he thought about Meneldur and the meaning of his name in Elvish, which means eagle of great flight, and then he thought that he should be near the city he wanted to reach. When he fell asleep, William dreamed of Gracethul holding a lighted lantern, approaching him, putting her hand on his head and letting him see a glimpse of the future, through which he saw the image of Meneldur. William's health is compromised, and he realizes that Meneldur might be in danger, so he decides to go around the forest until he reaches his village to save her. When he reaches the village, he waits and observes the situation until he sees two people walking ahead of him, and one of them is holding a lighted lantern. William thought to talk to them and tell them that he knew Meneldur and was looking for him, but he noticed that an arrow had hit them from behind. So he ran quickly and blocked the arrow with his shield and told them to hide behind his back. He saw someone holding a torch running away, and when he saw the arrow, he saw the same arrow that was with Meneldur and realized that it was Meneldur who was going to cause danger to the village, not the victim. When William goes to confront him and ask him why he's doing this, Menel shoots his arrows at him and attacks him. The two men with William start whistling and talking loudly to wake up the villagers, and Meneldur tries to run away, but William runs after him. William began to think of a solution to resist Menel's spells, and suddenly he hit the ground with his leg and canceled the effect of the fairies with his strength that he trained with Blood Zaman. So Menel tried to use fire to burn him, but William avoided it and approached him and hit him in the stomach with a spear, and tried to control Menel and his soldiers before anyone was hurt. William tied them up in a spider web, and the villagers took them and locked them up. One of the villagers named John thanked him for his help and told him that they are used to having intruders from time to time, and according to William's knowledge of geography, the village is under the rule of the Kingdom of Fartale, but its law is applied to remote areas. William asked what they were going to do about Menel and his men, and John told him that they were from a village a day's travel from here, and that half-elves like Menel were known as wandering hunters in the nearby areas, and that he had helped them take out dangerous monsters before. When an old man came to talk to them, and John introduced him as the elder of their village, and his name was Tom. Tom gave him a gift to thank him for his help, and William said that it was thanks to the guidance of the God of Light. Tom asked him if anything happened to the village, would William be able to protect them, and William swore he would. Tom assured Tom that their village was safe with William's presence, and Tom suggested that he interrogate Menel and his soldiers and ask them why they had attacked them, and people began to suggest that they hang, but Tom refused to kill them before questioning them. When they woke up and he questioned them, they told him that the demons had destroyed their village and half the people living there had died and had no shelter, food, or drink. Menel told them that it was his idea to attack the village because they had no chance to live if they chose to face the demons, so they chose to escape, loot the village, and escape to a place away from death. And the old lady named Marble helped him in the village. Turns out Tom knew her and asked Menel if anything had happened to her. Meneldur said she was dead, and that if they were going to hang someone, they should hang him because it was his idea and he was responsible for what happened. Tom said they owed him for helping them before, and he sympathized with what had happened to their village. but he had no choice but to hang them all. William thought that since they had no shelter, if they were free, they would plunder other villages, and that they had to die for the safety of the village. And he thought of his mother Mary's commandment that he should love others, not be afraid of loss, and do good, and Blood's commandment that he should believe in himself and what he could achieve. William interrupted them to say that he could solve the issue without anyone dying, and was inspired by Gus' idea to solve the issue with money and give them compensation as an atonement for what Menel had done. They said they would accept the compensation, but they didn't have the money to pay for it, and William offered to pay the money on their behalf. Tom asked him why he was offering to pay the compensation for them, and William said that demons were his mortal enemies because they had killed his family, that he had sworn to Grayskull to drive out evil and free people from any suffering, that he would free Menel and his soldiers from their suffering at the mercy of the devil, and that he would go and cleanse their village of the demons that occupied it, and asked him to take Menelder with him because he was a good hunter and the keeper of the forest. Tom asked him if he was sure he wanted to do this because they felt they were the only ones to benefit from such a deal. He told them to consider the money as his reward and prayed to the god of light for a blessing. Tom then ordered them to release Menel and his soldiers. The villagers then decided to adopt the 2 villagers who were not involved in the raid and keep them as hostages so that they would not think of attacking the village again. While they were on their way, Menelder asked him about his goal to rid him of the village, and William said that he had said everything he had to the people of the village, and asked him if it was okay for him to come with him to free the village from demons, and Menelder agreed and considered this his punishment for attacking the village. So William told him that he paid his debts after he paid the tribute. Menelder asked him if he was not afraid that he would betray him, and William said that if he did so, the villagers would be the ones who would be harmed, not him, and they agreed to team up and try to free the village from the demons in it. On their way, Menelder asked him about the plan, and William said that they will start attacking any demon that stops them, but Menel was surprised and said that there are many of them and they have dangerous monsters, so they must make a plan to ensure victory. But William said that he is used to facing them and it is better to try to reach the village quickly before its inhabitants turn into zombies. William and Menelder took a walk in the forest, and Menelder was the one who said to take the most direct route because he kept the whole forest well, and they kept walking until they reached a certain point, and Menelder said they would camp there until the next day and use the forest as a shelter. At night, they built a fire to keep them warm and ate together. William asked him about his life, and Menel said that he was raised in harsh conditions, and that's why he doesn't know how to deal with people who grew up like him, but he promised him that he would repay his debt and help him get the village back, but he said he would get him to the village but not fight demons with him, and William agreed to his condition. The next day, they continued on their way to the village amidst foggy weather, until Menel said they had reached the village, then asked him to wait until he saw that the road ahead was clear and there were no enemies. After he returned, he told William that the demons were in the temple, and Menelder tried to draw him a diagram of the temple on the ground, saying that they had formed a circle in the middle of the temple to perform their rituals and that there were soldiers standing in front of the temple. After William learned from him all the information about their number and types, he decided to go to face them, and when he got there, he started attacking them one after the other with all his skills, whether magical or combat, and when he attacked the last 2, he found that Menelder had hit them with his arrows and killed them, and William was surprised because Menel said that he would not face the demons, so he decided to fight when he realized that William would win and that they would not be easy prey for them. After they had made their way through the village, Menelder heard a voice calling out from under the rubble, and when they approached it, Menelder's brother, who had been turned into a zombie, said that demons had attacked the village and that he had tried to resist with all his strength because he was sure that he would come and save him. Menelder felt remorse and ashamed of himself for wanting to loot the village and flee to a safe place and leave his family behind. William Shalla came and introduced himself as Menel's friend and prayed to Grayskull to give his brother peace and guidance, and took his soul to rest in peace. Menel apologized to William for thinking he was just a rich and arrogant boy who was blessed with divine protection, and William accepted his apology humbly, and they went to all the living dead in the village and said goodbye to them before the God of Light gave their souls peace and guidance. Menel then asked William to go to Marple's house and see if she was alive or dead. When he called for her, Marple appeared, and when she came out, William knew she was a high-ranking ghost and would have drawn the Overeater sword in case she decided to attack them. But Marple reassured him that she wasn't going to hurt them. Menelder introduced them to each other and said that he was a healer and healed the sick and returned souls to the cycle of death and rebirth. Marple sensed from the way he spoke that he had changed and that he wasn't the Menel she was used to. Menel felt angry at his helplessness in the face of what happened to his village and tried to hit Marple with his hands without touching her. He knelt on the ground in despair and asked to die with her, but Marple told him that despite everything he had done, The gods had given him a second chance, and that this was his last chance to be a decent human being and get away from a life of vagrancy. She told him that even if he hated the gods would never stop loving him and blessing him with their light. She told William to take care of Menelder and told him that the demon lord was deep in the forest right now and was sending his followers everywhere. After she knew what she needed, she told him it was time to rest in peace and said goodbye to Menel before she ascended to heaven. William and Menelder rescued the injured, treated them, brought them to safety, and prayed for peace, blessings, and guidance. A few days later, the villagers returned to their village and were shocked to see the devastation caused by the demons and kept digging graves to bury their dead. William asked them how they were doing and found that they were hiding some supplies in an underground bunker. One of the villagers said that they were going to celebrate tonight after returning to the village and honoring their dead, and offered him to celebrate with them and provide him with food and drink. Then William continued his journey through the forest and met a flash of a fairy walking ahead of him and wanted to follow him. And when William walked after him, he reached a peak and found Menel watching the sunset and told him that the ruins are a nest of the living dead and that many adventurers have gone in and out of the ruins. William said he would enter the lair at once and bring the undead back into the cycle of life and rebirth, and Menel gave up and asked him about Marple when she was alive. He said she was born in Graceland and lived in the forest of Erin with the elves. Menelder began to tell William his story and that his mother died after she left him in the forest. Menelder grew up among his tribe, but they preferred to shame him with his mother's story and called him a disgrace, which is why he couldn't get along with them and ran away from the forest. From then on, he became a hunter after he learned to use a bow and arrow and knives, and they remained his only source of livelihood, and he preferred to live until he came to Southmark to find treasures in the ancient ruins. But one of his team betrayed him, poisoned him, ate him, and almost died. But he was able to kill the traitor, and all his team died except for him. Then he walked away from the place they were in and didn't know where to go. When he got to the village, he fainted, and Marble, who was a young woman at the time, took him in and took care of him until he was well. And she had done the same for many other people, and was known in the village for her kindness and generosity. Menel said that he was able to protect the village from demonic monsters and dangerous creatures because he was a skilled hunter and was also one of the villagers, but he lost it all in an instant when he decided to gather the survivors from his village and rob the village that had saved him from death. After he finished his story, he got up and decided to get back on his feet, and William was surprised by his sudden behavior, as if he did not realize his suffering, and then thanked Menel for stopping him from robbing the village and giving him another chance to be good, and asked him to give him the protection of the divine god of light. William agreed to be a mediator between Menelder and the god of light, put his hand on his head and started praying to him, and Menelder swore that he would atone for his sins and that he would continue his life no matter what difficulties and suffering he faced, and they decided to return to complete a celebration with his village, and William was happy to meet his first friend in this world. The next day, the villagers were checking what was left after the destruction caused by the demons, and found that the demons had taken all their livestock and destroyed many tools and weapons, and they had to buy them from a place called White Sails, but they couldn't buy everything. William asked Menel about this place, and Menel was surprised that he did not know, so William asked Menel to tell him about the history of this place, and Menelder began to tell him that after the demons caused the destruction of the continent of Southmark, 100 heroes appeared and managed to destroy the Demon King, and the humans left the continent and lived in the grassland in the north, and William knew that he meant Blood and his companions. Menel went on to say that after the kingdom of Varthol united the southern region of the grasslands, they began to cultivate the land with the intention of reclaiming it, and created a port known as White Sails, where many people and heroes went, especially those who were inspired by divine revelation. He said that the God of Light had many faithful followers in the southern continent, but they were scattered after the Great Collapse. William felt pressured when he thought that this might be the responsibility that the gods had assigned him to take, to fight demons, protect people from evil, and make them believe in the gods. Then he told Menel that they need to fix the village before anything else, and Menel said that the villagers don't have enough money to compensate for their losses. William asked him if he wanted them to explore the ruins in exchange for dividing what they found among them in half. Menel agreed to William's offer, and after they went through the ruins, they were able to collect enough money to rebuild the village, and on their way, they heard a girl screaming. When they looked up, they saw a man and a little girl running away from something, and William found a huge gorilla chasing them and grabbed the box that the man was carrying on his back, and the girl grabbed a brick and threw it at the gorilla to get rid of the man. And when the gorilla came near her, William stood in front of her with his spear and stood ready to attack the gorilla. But the gorilla got scared when she looked into William's eyes and ran away from him, and William breathed a sigh of relief that he did not have to fight with her. William approached the girl to make sure she was okay, and she was impressed with his ability to scare the gorilla with his gaze. She told him that her name was Rubina Goodfellow and the man with her was Antonio, a traveling salesman, and they were on their way to White Sails. William introduced himself as a priest in the service of the god of light, Graceville, and Menel said he was rarely attacked when he was with William, and Robina was impressed by William's strength. Menelder asked them if they were alone or if there were other people with them. Antonio said that there were people with them, but they ran away when the gorilla attacked them, and Menel offered them to go to White Sails together and whispered to William that he would be the one to agree with them. Menel told Antonio that they wanted to buy cows and horses from White Sails, and Antonio offered to introduce them to a trader from whom they could buy at favorable prices, and Robina looked at William with admiration and fascination. After they reached a village, Robina began her tour, singing and playing for the people there. She asked William to collect all the donations and money they would give her, and she continued to play and sing as William and Menelder listened to her. When they looked at Antonio, they found him talking and negotiating with customers to sell them his merchandise. Then he asked William if the blessing he was invoking could heal diseases and wounds, and William said that it could. Antonio suggested that he attract people by treating their injuries and illnesses, and then Antonio could sell them something from his merchandise. When William treated a small child, his mother thanked him and asked him how much he wanted. William told her that he does not take money and offered her to look at Antonio's merchandise, and if she liked it, she would buy from him. Menelder was impressed by Antonio's cleverness in using Robina and William's abilities to attract people to him, and William said that he would also benefit from the fact that the God of Light would gain a large following through him, and that he would try not to confuse this ability with his own power. They were interrupted by Robina, who pulled William by the hand after he told her he was done healing people, and told him they were going to have a party to celebrate everyone's recovery, and Menel understood they were having a party so Robina could sing for more people and Antonio could sell more merchandise. At sundown, they continued on their way until they passed several villages and were able to raise money to buy what they needed from White Sails until they reached the wheat road and decided to stay there until the next day, where they stayed in an empty barn. Robina offered to sing something they liked and gave them several choices, including singing about the saga of the 3 heroes to kill the High King. William was surprised that Robina knew the story of his family and their war with the High King, but he sat down with them and asked her to sing it. And William realized that Gus, Blood, and Mary would be immortalized in history forever, and William learned from Robina's song some stories about his parents that they had never talked about before, and Robina sang them all night long. William learned their story when they were still human and traveled together before they became heroes, and among their travels they visited a remote town that was attacked by a wyvern monster, and the townspeople chose a beautiful half-elf girl and offered her as a sacrifice to it. When Mary finds out, she tells Blood that she has to save her, but Blood asks, where will they get the money? Gus says nothing, and William realizes that their characters in Robina's song are different than the ones he knows them to be. In the story, Mary, Blood, and Gus are sitting around a table when a little boy bumps into them, and when Mary opens it, he holds out 3 coins and 5 silver ones, and Gus takes them from him and says that if they can pay them money for stopping by the wyvern, they will do it. The boy said he was willing to pay more, even if they had to sell him personally to a dealer, but Blood was very discouraged and felt that all that money wasn't enough to stand up to a monster like wyvern. However, Blood admired the boy's character and courage, and they decided to take on the wyvern. When they came out, Wyvern was flying towards the girl to attack her, but Gus was able to stop him with his magical power, and when he was held in place, it turned out to be an ambush to lure him, and Mary came down from the cross she was tied to and attacked him with her magical power. Blood stepped forward and struck Wyvern in the neck with a sword, killing him and saving the girl from death. Blood asked them what they were going to do next, and Mary told them that it would be useless to stay in the village any longer. The boy told them that they were going to act, and Blood gave them a dagger engraved with magic words from Gus, so that they could defend themselves in times of danger. Mary gave them money and told them to take care of each other. When they refused to take the money, Gus told them to consider it an advance, and when they met again, they would pay it back, and Gus gave them his real name so that he could be their password. Robina ended the song with the boy and girl walking on their way to the city, and the 3 heroes continued their journey in search of a new adventure. The story continued that until today, there is an old half-elf woman who is still waiting for the person who knows the real name of the sage Gus to bring her to the palace of Count Dagger, who rules the kingdom of Fartail, to repay her and her husband's debt. Robina noticed that William was moved by the story and was about to cry, but he quickly wiped his tears away. The next day, William was practicing at the wheat farm with his spear and was excited to go to the kingdom of Farthel and meet people who knew Blood, Mary, and Gus and hear stories about them. Antonio said that he was impressed by William's strength and skill and using his weapons, and that not everyone can master a dwarven weapon. He said that he felt a sense of mystery about him and asked him about the goal he was trying to attain, and he said that it was the first time he had ever seen a dwarven weapon. Antonio told him that it was the first time he had met someone who was strong, courageous, educated, polite, not greedy for money, and at the same time not of noble descent, and he felt that he could be a holy knight. William said that he had lived a happy life and had lost it shortly before he began his journey, but that he had gained the divine protection of the God of Light, and that he wanted to learn more about the world, and when he learned more, he would know exactly what he wanted, and that he needed friends to share his journey with him. Afterward, they entered the barn and ate breakfast, agreeing to continue their journey after they finished eating and went to White Sails together. After they reached White Sails, Antonio began to explain to William the policy of Ethel, the governor of the city, that there is no entry inspection or taxation, and that goods are brought in by ship and then distributed throughout Southmark. William was impressed by the beauty of the city and its progress and freedom. Robina took him by the hand, and they started walking around White Sails, looking at the different shops and the goods that people sell until they came to an accessory store, and William saw things he had never seen before in this world, such as accessories, stones, and light poles that are illuminated by apprentice magicians who visit the city, and he also discovered that the city has a public bathhouse. After they entered the bathhouse, William was pleased with the purity of the water, and Antonio said it was pure because of the cleansing words of the apprentice mages, and they used the word heat to heat the bathhouse instead of fuel. Afterwards, William was enjoying the atmosphere of the city, and after they all met, they went to eat at a restaurant, and William was impressed with the city and its services in all aspects, whether eating, drinking, or hygiene. After that, they went to the city's temple, and William told them to wait for him until he returned, and William entered the temple and was surprised by the appearance of the temple from the air. And there were many statues like a tourist place until he reached a person and asked him about the priests of the temple. And when the person asked him about the god he follows, William said that he follows the god of light, Grayskull. The person told William that priests of the god of light are rare, so he had to use a prayer of faith to make sure he was right, because demonic attacks were increasing everywhere, and they had to make sure he wasn't following an evil god. They were interrupted by the voice of an old man who called him Bishop Bagley. William introduced himself and said that he had gained the protection of the god of light, Graceville, and had come to the temple to pay his respects. Bagley said that he was in charge of the temple and asked him how he could be sure that his words were true. Bagley said that divine protection should not be treated so simply, and William thought of Gus's words about magic as the same as Bagley's words about divine protection and blessing. Then Bagley asked him about the meaning of the teachings of the God of Light, and William said that there is no light without darkness, there are no words without silence, and there is no life without death. When Bagley realized that William was sincere, he ordered the other person to write William's name in the register and give him a tour of the temple, and he walked away, telling him not to make trouble in the temple. After William began to look around the temple, the person said that he had the misfortune to meet Bishop Bagley because he is a very angry and complaining person who doesn't use his blessing for anything, unlike his vicar, who is a good and kind person. After William sat with his friends in the temple's guest room, he asked them what they knew about the temple's president. Robina told him that people don't thank him much, and Antonio said that he might have hidden hands in the city's trade and industrial unions. When William looked out the window, he saw the wyvern dragon flying over the city and began to breathe fire, destroying buildings and landmarks, and the White Sails soldiers prepared to stop the wyvern, and people began to run everywhere and try to hide, and people were injured and children were lost from their families. William and his companions came down and found many people entering the temple to hide from the wyverns, and he decided to go out and do something about it. When he came to the roof of the temple with his spear, he realized that a large part of the city had been destroyed by the wyverns, and William thought that all the clerics were no longer in the city. When William spotted the wyvern, he tried to attack it with his thunder power, but it missed the dragon from a distance, and Menel stopped him before he tried to hit him again, telling him that using magic and anger could kill him and asking him to think before he did anything. William thought about what Gus had said about secondary magic and began to think about how he could defeat the wyvern. He asked Menelder to help him and asked Robina and Antonio to help the people get to safety. While the king was watching the chaos in his city from his palace, William and Menel stood up and used their magical powers and combined them with each other and managed to hit the dragon, but before he fell to the ground, he managed to rid himself of their magical attacks and flew into the sky again. When the wyvern spotted William and Menelder, it flew towards them to attack them. William began to pray and tell Graceful that he was fighting to drive out evil and save the suffering, and at the last moment before the dragon attacked, he and Menel were surrounded by a barrier of light that blocked the wyvern's fire. But the wyvern stood on the barrier and emitted a green aura around his body. When he stood on the barrier and broke it, Menel summoned the fairies and attacked the wyvern with a final attack, hitting him and causing him to fall to the ground, and William secured him and his shoulder with magic chains. The wyvern tried to break William's spell, but William ran at him as fast as he could and caught up with him before he could fly again, hitting him in the chest with his spear. But the wyvern was not dead and was ready to blow fire into everything in front of him. William thought about how to finish him off until he thought of blood and his talk about fighting abilities and muscles, and then he ran to the dragon and grabbed him by the neck before he could blow the fire, and William used all his strength and the wyvern fell to the ground and tried to hold him as long as he could until he broke his neck and died. Then Antonio left and congratulated him on being able to stop the wyvern, and Robina started singing to the people that they had a new hero and asked people to greet him and clap for him, and people started to gather around him and thank him for what he did for them. And the soldiers were impressed by his strength and abilities. As people began to clean up the destruction caused by the wyvern, William told Menel that he thought he was inexperienced and that he was lucky to be able to attack the wyvern with his spear, and asked himself about the aura that suddenly surrounded the wyvern. But Menel said he was pleased with his accomplishment and that he was able to defeat a monster the size of a wyvern. William said he would work on himself more to improve and felt happy to have killed a wyvern like Mary, Blood, and Gus had done back in the day. While William was helping to remove the debris, one of the temple servants called him and asked him to come with him to the Crown Prince because he wanted to see him. When he and Menel went, they were greeted by Crown Prince Ethel, and William introduced himself, and then they sat down to talk. But William noticed that Menel did not sit down and did not speak a word. The Crown Prince asked William who he was traveling with, and William said there were 4 of them, and that he had Menel, a hunter, Antonio, a merchant, and Robina, a poet and traveling priestess. Ethel thought that each of them had magical powers and that they were facing the wyvern, but William explained that only he and Menelder had faced the dragon. Ethel was curious about William's ability to use 3 abilities on his own and asked him to explain exactly what he did. William told him that he used his power to break the dragon's neck. Ethel was surprised that William killed the dragon and didn't feel proud of what he did and admired him as a warrior. William asked him if there was anything he could do to help them repair the damage caused by the dragon, but Ethel said that there was still help coming from the land and asked him to accept his thanks on behalf of the people of White Sails for his help and offered to do anything they wanted as a reward. William asked him if he could send his army to fight the demons and demonic monsters in the neighboring villages and forests. And Ethel said that it is difficult but not impossible because he cannot send his army and leave his city unprotected, especially after the wyvern attack, and Ethel explained that the aura that comes out of him is a poisonous miasma, and anyone who touches it is corrupted and cannot control himself. Ethel explained that they had expanded their kingdom under the previous king and couldn't protect all the areas under their rule directly, so William asked him to let him hire mercenary soldiers and hunters with his own money and form an army to stop the demons. Ethel asked him if he was sure of what he was asking, and that saving everyone was a task that even the gods could not do. But William insisted on his request, and Ethel said that he would consider killing him after daring to make such a request. William asked him how he would justify his death to people, and Ethel said he would say he was poisoned in battle against the wyverns, and it was too late for them to save him. William understood that he said this because he couldn't prove his identity while at the same time asking him to send troops with him to an area that wasn't under his control. William thought about how he could convince him of himself and then asked Ethel if salt disappeared from the world, what would give salt its flavor, and that it was the same idea as those who carry a torch, that they only live in the sunlight, and if they die, no one will light the way for others, and that they should step on the path of the first darkness, and asked him to agree to his mission. But Ethel warned him that the path he was about to take would end in despair and failure, and even if he succeeded, he would have to pay the price. When he saw William's determination, he agreed, saying that he was a high priest and had loyal companions, because when he said he would kill him, Menel gave him a threatening look, but Menel justified it by saying that he also felt a danger to himself and that he would be killed along with William. Suddenly, Bagley interrupted them after storming into the office and started talking to Ethel, who was furious about the order to see William without his permission, since William's name was on the temple register and he was considered a member of the temple, even if only temporarily, and this was considered disrespectful to the temple's authority. Ethel said that the temple servants had nothing to do with this matter and said that William should form his own army and go save the people living in the monster forest, and asked Bagley that his temple give William a blessing because he had decided to make him a Knight of White Sails, and that Ethel and Bagley would be responsible for him except that he could fire him whenever he wanted. Bagley was shocked by all the decisions that Ethel had made for William and asked Ethel to return to the temple and give him a chance to think about it, and then they all left the Crown Prince's office. After they left, Bagley scolded him for his request to Ethel, but Menel answered him, and they continued to argue with each other. The girl with Bagley apologized to William and told him that he was facing troubles and pressures that were the reason for his behavior. William asked her if Bagley was still her father, and she told him she was his adopted daughter, and told him that when he was in charge of a temple in the capital next to a large orphanage, and when Ethel asked him to come live in White Sails, she was one of the people he took with him. William then interrupted his argument with Menel and thanked him for his help for intervening in time to save them from the Crown Prince. But Bagley said that he didn't intervene because of him and that he was only defending the authority of the temple, and told him that he would be in the chapel after the evening prayers. William asked him about the evening prayer, and Bagley explained that their prayers began to be practiced 200 years ago, and William learned that their prayers are called by different names, and Bagley asked his daughter Anna to get William religious books and hire a suitable teacher to teach him their rituals. After William returned to the temple, Bagley entered and stood praying. William was curious and asked him why he didn't use his blessing and liked to pray alone without anyone seeing him. Bagley asked him if the God of Light gave him his protection to give him special treatment or for some other reason, and William was silent and didn't know how to respond. Bagley said that when God grants him divine protection, he wants to achieve something through him, and their role is to always think about how to use the blessing in order to live up to the ideals of the gods, and that using the blessing as a tool will not bring glory to the gods. He said he must resort to worldly needs and not use his blessing in a city that is just beginning to develop so that people do not question his status and to bring glory to the gods of the vault. Bagley continued that the proper course of blessings and prayers is to be stored in their atmosphere, that he had entrusted his viceroy to glorify the gods through blessings, and that he bore a great burden as the face of the temple, and wondered how a young boy like him could be ordered by the crown prince to be the city's paladin. Bagley then advised him to refuse the position because it would hurt him as a novice and offered to inform him on his behalf if he felt embarrassed, but William refused and said that it might be the wish of the God of Light to fulfill something through him. Bagley asked him about his oath to the God of Light, and William said that he swore to give his life, drive out evil, and save the poor. Bagley laughed at him and told him he'd have a few soldiers with him and the rest would be up to him. William thanked him, knowing that he had to respect the man no matter what people said about him. William left the restaurant and thought about his conversation with Menel, saying that he was not talking about people who see adventure as a source of work, but about people who seek adventure as a form of glorification, and they agreed that they were talking about people who are willing to sacrifice their lives to fight demons. After they left the restaurant, they put up flyers asking for soldiers to go on an expedition to explore the monster jungle with them, with low pay, glory, and praise, and no guarantee that they would come back alive. People started making fun of William and his offer, but they were interrupted by a man who was sitting in the bar drinking. When William called him, he thought of Blood's words when he said that if you see a swordsman, look at his fingers and you can tell if he will draw his weapon or not, and then the person said that he was looking for a bunch of crazy people to go with him on such a mission. William said that's why they came, and the people who were sitting at the same table with the swordsman laughed at his request and asked him if he wanted to go to the monster forest to do what, and William said that he wanted to confront the Demon King, which drew the attention of the swordsman to William, who continued and said that the Demon King was wreaking havoc in the monster forest. The swordsman said that they wouldn't know his exact location and that they could die if they fell into any trap in the forest. However, he said that he agreed to participate with him in this mission in exchange for his pocket money, food, drink, and a place to sleep. The people began to be convinced and asked William to join them, and William introduced himself, and the swordsman got up and greeted William and introduced himself and said that his name was Ristov. After William and Menel returned to their friends in the dormitory, each of them was doing something, and William had a book to read after he learned that a party was being held in White Sails to provide jobs for the people who lost their homes and jobs in the Wyvern attack. Robina was in the bed next to him, composing a new song about him. He asked her not to write a song about him, but Robina told him the song was ready and she was excited to hear it. Antonio was calculating the price of the cows and horses he needed to buy, and William asked him to negotiate with the sick and wounded to join them at a lower price in exchange for treating them, and that it would be useful for him to expand his business between White Sails and the Beast Forest, and asked him how much he needed to do that. Antonio said he would have to negotiate with him afterward, and Menel told him that he had to learn how and when to spend his money because he would have to negotiate with Ristov and the other soldiers who joined him on the mission. When Robina heard Ristov's name, it became clear that she knew him and asked them to meet him, and William and Menel picked her up and went to the bar where Ristov was sitting. William asked how long they knew each other, and Ristov said that they had met many times, but Robina expressed her displeasure that every time she met him, his stories about his adventures did not change and she could not get a new idea out of him. Robina started talking about how Ristov is as mysterious as his adventures, that he doesn't like to cooperate with anyone, that he accepts big and difficult tasks, yet he can accomplish them in the fastest time, and that she needs to know more information about his adventures in order to write stories and novels about them, but the information is always incomplete or insufficient. At that time, Robina had an idea that Ristov and William should face each other in a challenge, but William was embarrassed and hesitant about Robina's idea, while Ristov accepted the challenge if it was against a strong opponent, so William had to agree, but the confrontation would be after they finished their mission in the Forest of Monsters. Robina was delighted that they agreed to the idea and said she would make a song out of it that would be heard for centuries and millennia. But William was not convinced. Days later, on the day of the ceremony, people were able to rebuild the places that were destroyed in the Wyvern attack, and the city began to return to its beautiful shape, and people attended the ceremony of William's appointment as a knight of white sails by Prince Ethel and gave him his own sword, and the deputy bishop began to pray to the god of knowledge to be a mediator between him and the god of light Grayskull to grant him her blessing forever amidst everyone's celebration. After a while, William gathered the troops he needed and started their journey in the Forest of Monsters with the permission of the Crown Prince and the official temple, and when they left, they started collecting resources and supplies for humans from the safe areas of the forest to distribute them to the poor villages, and Antonio was funding the team by collecting contributions and donations from people of means. Bishop Bagley appointed priests from the temple to travel with William to heal and help the sick and injured in the villages they passed along the way, and when he reported the whereabouts of monsters and demons, Ristov and his adventurers chased them away. William realizes that this is why people call them a hacker and asks Ristov if he can kill a wyvern in one fell swoop like other monsters. Ristov says he can do it if the wyvern is within range of his sword. William began to gain a reputation among the villages for solving disputes and conflicts between people, so neighboring villages called him to solve their people's problems, and this helped him to expand his business, and over time they found that the villages were safe and the people were living well. And William remembered Gus's words when he said that he could solve any issue without using magic as long as he had money. William and his soldiers stayed in camps near the monster forest until the summer, when Ristov came to him while he was cleaning his weapon and informed him that a scouting party had gone west and had not returned for 12 days, and William asked him to gather a team of their best scouts to go with them to scout the party. After Ristov gathered the team, William stood up and told them that this could be the beginning of a battle if the band was kidnapped by demons. As they began their journey, Menel asked him what he thought happened to the missing band, and William said he doubted they were lost due to their skill. After they arrived at the location of the lost band, they found their bodies on the ground with birds eating them and found huge footprints of a demonic beast. Then they gathered all the bodies in one place and started praying for their souls to rest in peace. Menel noticed a missing member of the band and tools thrown in a direction leading down the valley, as if someone was able to escape from the monster before it killed him. After William saw a severed head, he realized it was a trap and told his soldiers to get out of the canyon, but then the demonic monsters appeared from above and behind them, and they were trapped in the passageway. William gave all his soldiers, including himself, a blessing of protection against poison and boosted their strength, and an elder used fairies to create an aura around the soldiers. Then the monsters came down to attack William and his soldiers, and the battle began, and they fought with all their strength until they were surprised by a huge three-headed monster that appeared behind Menel, and as soon as Menel saw it, he summoned the fairies to form a barrier around himself, but the monster was faster and struck Menelder with a blow from his hand. Menel fell to the ground and was severely injured and was unable to get up. Then one of the monster's heads attacked Menel with a huge beam that burned him in front of William, who was resisting a monster attack on him, but then he felt angry and was still using the thunder ability to attack the monster. But the two-headed snake monster attacked him from behind and interrupted his words and accidentally injured himself with the thunder ability. William was shocked by what happened and kept asking himself what he did wrong and why it was happening. And while the snake was approaching him to swallow him, he felt himself unaware that he was wielding the Overeater sword and eliminating the monsters around him in one fell swoop and regaining his health. William begins to lose control of himself and attacks any non-human creature he sees in front of him with the Overeater sword, surrendering to its power, killing monsters, and regaining his health after each damage he takes amidst the shock and amazement of his soldiers. William realized that he had failed his parents, Blood, Mary, and Gus, and that after all the training he had undergone in his life, And after he had acted wisely and planned everything, suddenly all that was gone and faded away as anger and blindness took over, until Ristov caught him and guided him after he eliminated all the monsters in front of them. William ran to Menelder to save him before he died and started praying to Graceful to heal his wounds, but William felt his thoughts were confused because he had used the demon blade, and then he passed out next to Menelder while he was healing him. After a while, William woke up and found Resthoff by his side, saying that they had to go to the nearest village to the valley and that the three-headed monster had escaped and that Menelder was still alive but in a coma. William got up to check on him, but he felt too much pain to get out of bed, and Ristov said he needed to rest because he had used up too much of his energy. William thought about what he had done wrong, that he had no choice in the battle, that he had fallen into the monster's trap in the first place, and that he should have been more careful, but he felt he had made a bigger mistake than that. That's when he heard people talking about him and his soldiers and what had happened to them, and William felt a little discouraged. After some time, William didn't stop thinking about what happened in the valley and thought that maybe his overconfidence in Menelik and his ability to stop any enemy would have gotten him killed. On his way, he met Robina and Antonio, who came to the village after receiving his letter, and Antonio said that Anna was coming with some priests. Robina told William that they had heard that he had saved Menelder's life after facing a powerful monster named Chimera and was impressed by his strength, but William was frustrated and sad and felt that he had failed miserably and left them and went to check on Menel, and Antonino tried to tell him to rest, but William said that he was strong and that he was fine. William continued on his way in the rain, thinking about his strength, which he used to deal with humbly in front of people when they were all impressed by his abilities, and realized that his strength was not accepted in the world he lived in. When he entered Menel's room, he saw a lot of bandages wrapped around his body and eyes, and felt guilty for him, and that everything that happened was because of him. He sat next to him and started praying for him, and prayed that Graceville would take pity on Menel, and heal him and apologize to Menel, because all he wanted was a friend whose strength was equal to his own, and that he was looking for someone who was a mixture of Blood, Mary, and Gus who could support each other and respect each other. William felt lonely because he was different from everyone else, the same way he felt in his old life, and because he was afraid all the time. He began to feel that the people he was supposed to protect were his friends, and that's why he was going to cause the death of Menelder. Then William saw Graceville's sad face. He comforted her and told her that he was acting wrong, but now he will fix everything, and decided to continue his journey alone without hurting anyone else. William walked alone and left the village and went to the forest and met Menel and asked him, "Where are you going?" William told him that he was going to kill the demonic monsters alone because he doesn't feel that Menel is as strong as he is, and Menel felt provoked by William's words. William went on to say that he was going to kill the Chimera monster and the entire herd of demonic beasts and the demons that control them, and as soon as William got back from Menel's side, Menel turned and hit William on the head, leaving William unharmed, and continued on his way. Menel got angry and kept trying to hit William, but William coldly avoided his blows, so he thought of breaking Menel's arm to let him go, but Menel got up again and prevented William from continuing on his way. Menel then tried to use his fairy spell to attack William, but William would have dodged it if he hadn't realized that if he dodged it, Menel would take a lot of damage, so he took the damage from his spell instead of dodging it. Menel approached him and asked him why he wanted to walk away from them and continue alone, accusing him of being a coward. William told him that he didn't have to stop him or continue with him, but Menel surprised him and said that he was continuing with him because he considered him his friend, and friends always stick together no matter what. William was touched by Menel's words that he would not abandon him and let him go on alone, that they have had many adventures since they met, and that without him he would not have lived until now, and that he may not be as strong as he is now, but he will get there one day. Menel extended his hand to William and his people from the ground, and William was pleased because it was the first time he had ever argued with a friend. They returned to the village and were greeted by soldiers and villagers, and Antonio asked William to tell him what had happened. Then they went to Christoph, and he told William that he had something called the power disease, and that the stronger he was, the more powerful the blow would be, and William apologized for what he was going to do, and Menelder seemed ready to return to the valley again and face the Chimera in order to redeem himself. William reasoned that the Chimera could be a demonic ritual monster, and that they had to kill all the demons before they escaped again. The soldiers were eager to go back and face the monsters again, and William motivated them further by saying that he would reward anyone who killed a demonic monster with a silver coin and 10 gold coins if anyone could kill the leader of the demons. A day later, William and his companions mobilized an army, recruited new soldiers, took turns sending out scouts to know the location of monsters and traps, prepared themselves well and decided not to use any tricks and face their enemies head-on. When they got back to the valley, William decided to set up their arsenal in a place and asked the priests to support them and stay behind them, and when they were ready, they would send a line of soldiers to the battle area. After a while, William and his soldiers were preparing and a group of monsters appeared from afar, coming towards them, and they all drew their weapons and headed towards the soldiers to start the second battle between them directly, and everyone began to use the abilities and blessings of their gods and goddesses. William prayed to Graceville for protection against the monsters' poisons, and after they defeated the monsters one by one, William thought about how he was going to face all these monsters alone and that he couldn't go on without them. In the office of Ethel, Prince of White Sails, Ethel received reports that the war had begun, and Ethel asked himself if William and Menel could succeed and achieve a heroic feat that would go down in history. And Bagley told him that if he failed, they would withdraw their support for him. After they defeated William and his army of monsters, they made their way through the forest until they came to an abandoned monastery. They walked cautiously in anticipation of any traps that might be set in the house. After Menel was sure it was safe, they were going to continue on their way, but William sensed something around them. William used his magical ability and scanned the area around them, and found a chimera monster standing in front of them, which was disguised. William asked the monster if his goal was to reach the High King. The monster was surprised and asked William if he was a warrior sent by one of the gods. William began to think before answering the monster's question. William understood that the demon's goal was to keep the forests and remote villages in chaos so that they could put pressure on humans and reach the city of the dead, remove the High King's seal, and return to the world from underground. The monster started attacking William and Menel, but William dodged the blow and struck his spear into the head of the chimera in the text, and the monster flew away. William realized that he was going to make a surprise attack, so he summoned his fairies to protect himself from the monster's attack, and William prayed to Graceville to protect them. William was able to dodge the monster's attack and hit it with a spear to its body. Menel used his magic to hold the monster in place. William kept hitting it with the spear and Menel attacked it with arrows. William kept hovering around the monster and hitting it in different parts of its body. Menel used a spell on his arrow before he hit the beast and was able to cut off its tail, and William was able to destroy one of its heads. The beast decided to use the power of the dragon and began to approach William and told Menel to back off and that he could defeat it on his own. William trusted in his abilities to stop the monster, and William and Menel attacked the monster at the same time. Menel pinned the monster to the ground with his spells, and William attacked the monster with his spear and defeated and killed the monster. After they entered the abandoned temple, they found Ristov waiting for them in the air and killed the leader who was there and asked William to give him the 10 gold coins he had promised, and William was amazed that Ristov beat them to it. Then the rest of the soldiers arrived at the temple and met William, Menel, and Ristov in the air and celebrated their first victory against the demons. After they returned, they admired the scenery while listening to Robina's melody after she sang the poem she had composed for William, and after she finished, she told Menel that she would compose the next song for him. William and Menelder stood on top of the hill and were optimistic that people looking for new lands to live in would be able to travel to the south after they cleared it of all the monsters. Menel told William that the villagers were starting to build a shrine to Graceville. Menel asked William what he was going to do next, and if he was going to appoint himself ruler of the monster forest, but William laughed and said that he was just a knight of a single generation with no place to belong. Menel said that he doesn't realize his self-worth, and that Paladin has divine protection from the god of light, is a knight of white sails, and has become powerful after he received the protection of the temple and the crown prince, and is responsible for arbitrating between people in the villages, which gives him all the power over all the people in those villages. Menel went on to say that William was able to control the movement of goods, military forces, and all kinds of power after he succeeded in clearing the monster forest of the demons that had occupied it. William was confused and felt a great deal of responsibility. He told Menelder that his goal was to eliminate the demons and help the poor villages live and improve their conditions, and he thought it would go smoothly, just like it did with Blood, Mary, and Gus. He wondered how he'd come to have all this, but felt it might be a worthy goal. He told Menel that as long as they were with him, he'd succeed in his responsibilities. William dreamed of making the city of the dead a normal city and bringing people back, and if he succeeded, he'd take his friends and go to Mary and Blood's grave and introduce them to them as he promised them.
Will sat in his office, the young lord of Beastwoods running his fingers across a neat stack of freshly made paper spread across his table. The gesture was oddly tender, as though he were caressing something precious. Meneldor, entering at just the right moment, could not resist a jab. He teased that Will looked a little too cheerful stroking paper, stroking it like it was a long-lost sweetheart. Will, with that familiar half-smile that gave away nothing and everything at once, replied only that these sheets represented the future. The words were cryptic, but they carried weight. The two of them later stepped outside. The air was sharp and cold, winter's approach pressing down on the bustling streets. Menildor hunched in his cloak like a chilled cat, muttering about the cold, while Will seemed unfazed, as if paladins had a secret passive skill called immune to shivers, his gaze distant as though he were seeing more than the crowd before him. His thoughts wandered back 2 years to the time he had left the city of the dead and followed the northern river. That journey had led him to a sunken ruin, and now that ruin had risen again as Torchport, proudly known as the Port of Light. Quite the glow-up. The sight of its transformation brought warmth even in the cold season. Menildor, still curious about Will's strange words earlier, pressed him about the paper. Will explained that while their trade in lumber with the White Sails was booming, unchecked cutting would eventually bleed the forest dry. Paper production, however, could provide a sustainable path, diversifying their economy and securing long-term stability. It was, in his eyes, a future worth celebrating. Menildor gave him a long look before chuckling that Will sometimes thought like an elf, always planning decades ahead. He admitted it was impressive, but also a little confusing. Like, how can a man fight monsters one day, then sit down the next day worrying about eco-friendly industry? For Menildor, it was baffling. For Will, it was simply the way forward. The conversation drifted to lighter things. Menildor asked if Will would attend Prince Ethelbald's upcoming party in White Sails. Will agreed, which sounded casual but really meant, yes, I'll brave hours of awkward small talk. When the solstice arrived, winter cloaked the land in its first snowfall. The festival filled the capital with joy and color. One morning, Will and Bee strolled together through the streets. Bee radiated happiness, recalling all the fun of the festival, while Will admitted with some sheepish honesty that greeting nobles with a polite smile had been harder than any duel he had ever fought. Still, thanks to everyone's help, he had endured. Yet, as always, Will's eyes caught the bigger picture. He confided to Bee that while the city gleamed, the beast woods were still a mess. The work ahead remained vast. Bee promptly thumped him on the head like a woodpecker and teased that he worried way too much. His brooding cracked under her cheer, and he smiled softly. In that moment, he swore again his vow to Gracefiel, to be her sword and her hand, both destroyer of evil and lifter of the suffering. Bee, moved by his dedication, encouraged him to keep striving to please the goddess. When he offered to take her wherever she wished, Bee surprised him. She led him into the woods toward the ruins of an ancient sorcerer's academy, once a school for those who studied the words of creation themselves. Will expected her to choose a nice cafe. Instead, she picked the magical death maze. Typical Bee. She declared she wanted to find something there, determination lighting her face. But when she tried to rush in, Will stopped her with a big brother vibe, warning about the still active wards and how barging in could equal instant bad ending. Bee's shoulders slumped, disappointment washing over her, but Will, softened by her expression, suggested they try the front door instead. Their attempt quickly led them astray in the snowy forest. A spell cleared their path, but ominous carvings warned them to turn back or learn, reminders that even Gus in his youth could not pass through unaided. They pressed on anyway, passing a weeping tree, definitely not a welcoming decor choice.
What's that?
Until they stumbled upon an old man sitting cozily by a fire. He greeted them with laughter, calling himself the Academy's groundskeeper and remarking that his name was unworthy of a paladin when asked what his name was. Will was stunned. The man already knew him. That's always unsettling, like running into someone who knows your gamertag from 2015. Bee declared her wish to enter the academy. The old man questioned her motives, pointing out she was neither student nor sorcerer, but she stood firm, saying there was something she wished to see. Will respectfully explained they sought permission for only a short visit. The groundskeeper chuckled, saying he hoped permission would indeed be granted, then offered them food. The conversation drifted to magic, and the man asked Will to demonstrate. Will recognized the test hidden in the request and declined to treat magic as mere entertainment, just as his master had taught him. A very "Dad said no" response, but the right one. Instead, when asked to help gather firewood, he complied without complaint, resisting the temptation to dry the logs with magic and simply laying them by the fire instead. The old man thanked him, and then, with a twinkle in his eye, asked them what great magic they would choose if such a miracle existed in the world. Bee, quick to answer, said she would want a magic that could bring people happiness, like Will's did for her. The old man's laughter was warm, and with a blink, the forest vanished. They stood suddenly before the academy's gates, the groundskeeper now revealed as Hiram, its professor and caretaker. Bee wasted no time rushing to explain what she wanted to see, and he granted her entry. Together they passed through vast halls lined with history. Bee nearly fainted when she saw a working golem, only to be reassured it had been crafted long ago by a previous master of forms. While Will geeked out over its mana stability like an engineer inspecting fine craftsmanship, quietly awed at what kind of creation magic could hold it together. As they walked, Will asked how the Academy determined magical talent. Hiram explained that all words carried power, whether everyday speech or the words of creation, for both shared the same roots. At last, he led them to the library, granting access to every corner save for the forbidden shelves. B bowed, thanking him sincerely for indulging such an unusual request. Hiram excused himself, leaving them free to explore. B scoured the shelves for her goal while Will browsed, pausing over a history of magic, curious how much had shifted in the 2 centuries he had not known. Eventually B returned with 2 books, one a registry of graduates, the other a collection of local histories. They studied until the evening light faded, then bid Hiram farewell. On the way home, B finally revealed her motive. Before becoming a troubadour, she had traveled with a golden-haired sorceress, a kind and radiant woman whose eyes rivaled the sea. She had helped countless people, even earning the title of hero in some places, but history had already begun to forget her. B could not allow that. She would immortalize her through song because songs carried hope and memory. Heroes may fade, but music endures. Songs, she said, carried hope, and through them the hero's light would endure. Will listened in silence, moved by her devotion. B then grew restless, suddenly eager to sing. Will, smiling at her determination, agreed to accompany her, finding a place where her voice could once more lift the hearts of those around them. Menildor and Will cut their way through the forest, blades flashing as one demon after another fell before them. It should have been a simple trek, but of course, demons never RSVP before crashing your day. Manel, always the opportunist, even walked away with a shiny new sword, like a free souvenir shop, except the clerk screamed a lot. Surveying the carnage, Manel reasoned that if these commanders were just the gatekeepers, then they were near the Lord of the Forest. Sure enough, they soon arrived at a colossal, ancient tree. Manel identified it as the Lord of Holly, ruler of the Winter Forest. Before they could get closer, a massive shadow emerged. A demon general sneered, asking about his missing gatekeepers. He knew their names, Sir William the Faraway Paladin and Menildor of Swiftwings. Will coolly returned the favor, calling him by name General Cernunnos. Unfortunately, demon generals aren't the chatting type. Cernunnos skipped introductions and summoned an army of minions, promising that the 2 heroes would die right there. A few days earlier, things had seemed less dire. During the summer solstice, Will noticed snowdrops blooming out of season. Cute at first, until Prince Ethelbald asked him to investigate with Manel. The duo ventured deep into the woods, discovering dead animals rotting in unnatural ways. Manel muttered that the forest had gone mad, which is never a great Yelp review. The truth soon emerged. The forest was balanced by 2 ancient spirits, the Lord of Oak and the Lord of Holly, twin trees who exchanged royal authority each solstice. This trade-off kept the seasons in harmony, basically nature's way of clocking in and out, but something had gone terribly wrong. The Lord of Holly had refused the transfer, and now the balance was broken. The Lord of Oak confirmed it when they arrived before it, warning that if the situation wasn't fixed, the forest would collapse under spreading corruption. Menel, bold as ever, offered to take the authority himself. Will was horrified, but the Lord of Oak dismissed the idea. With his human blood, Menel would burn out in a month. Menel shrugged, basically saying that they'll just resolve the situation in a month. Reluctantly, the Oak agreed and set him a trial. Manel entered the forest alone and days later emerged battered but victorious, proving himself worthy. Back in the present, Manel unleashed his newfound authority, summoning vines that crushed the demon forces with all the subtlety of a lawnmower. Will, meanwhile, ended General Cernunnos in what could only be described as an anticlimactic boss fight. Just like that, the path to the Lord of Holly opened. At the Great Tree, Menel transferred the authority back where it belonged. The Lord of Holly restored balance instantly, healing the corruption like it was just a bad cold. Grateful, the spirit thanked them but also dropped a bombshell. Because of his bond with the oak, Menel was destined to become the forest's ruler one day. Menel balked, insisting he had no intention of becoming tree royalty. The Lord of Holly explained that responsibility came bundled with the authority, like an unwanted feature in a software update. Thankfully, Menel still had the choice to live and die human. Before they left, the Lord of Holly issued a dire prophecy. In the Rust Mountains to the west where red rocks burned, a black calamity stirred. There, demons multiplied, and the Lord of Hellfire in Miasma lay asleep atop the stolen riches of men. When it wakes, its flames might consume the whole land in its entirety. The Lord of Holly warned Will to prepare, fight or not, the choice would be his. Then, casually, the spirit blessed them with the promise of a bountiful harvest because apparently, doomsday warnings come with coupons. Back in White Sails, Will and Menel reported to Prince Ethelbald. Menel grumbled about being called on constantly, but the prince brushed it off, saying Will was his retainer and Menel just came along free of charge, a true 2-for-1 deal. Bishop Bagley then arrived, panting and sweating like he'd sprinted across the continent. After pleasantries, Will relayed the prophecy. The prince sighed, recalling Will's story of the demon High King and the city of the dead. Trouble never seemed to take vacations here. Bagley questioned the prophecy's reliability, but Mennel stood firm, pointing out the Lord of Holly's dominion. Bagley relented, advising they treat it as a top priority. Will accepted the mission with excitement, already plotting the first step: gather intel from dwarves and his troubadour friend B. Ethelbald urged secrecy. After all, nothing ruins a kingdom faster than spoilers. Later, over dinner, Will pressed B about the Rust Mountains. B, ever the professional troubadour, reminded them that songs aren't free. Mennel bargained, since she'd hear their adventures firsthand, that counted as payment. Satisfied, she revealed the tale. 2 centuries ago, the Rust Mountains were the Iron Mountains, home to proud dwarves who worship Blaze, god of fire and technology. They joined the Union, a powerful nation, but when demons invaded, the Dwarven King led his warriors to battle. None returned, and the details of their sacrifice were lost, even to song. The mountains fell to ruin, demons overran them, and the once proud peaks gained their new name, the Rust Mountains. Mennel recalled seeing Dwarven refugees in Torchport, and B urged Will to question them. The path forward was set. Later, as they walked again, Mennel guided them by the fairy's path. He explained that his new authority told him where to go. Will quipped that if they got separated, he was doomed. Mennel reassured him, promising he would drag Will back even if he strayed, because, as he admitted, he owed Will debts he could never repay. Maybe one day, centuries later, he'd even watch over Will's grave and his descendants. Until then, he promised to fight by his side until the end. Thanks to Mennel's fairy-guided shortcuts, the two reached Torchport in record time. Normally, the trip took days, but with Mennel in charge, it felt more like they had booked the express lane. Will and Meneldor finally arrived back in Torchport, where Antonio greeted them with his usual warmth. The pair wasted no time, explaining their intent to meet the dwarves about the Rust Mountains. Antonio, ever the helpful host, mentioned that the refugees had settled far better than anyone first expected, despite Torchport citizens being wary at the start. Now, a year later, the dwarves were part of the town's heartbeat. Antonio suggested they seek out Agnar, the leader of the dwarves, if they wanted to learn more. Will agreed, promising to visit the next day. That night, Will dreamed vividly. He saw Gus and Blood, his old mentors, recounting tales of spirits and of dwarven warriors who laid down their lives for what they cherished. Their words carried weight, pressing on his mind even as he woke at dawn for training. Meneldor, sparring with him, teased that his boyish looks didn't match his superhuman strength. Will, with a wry smile, muttered that he'd have preferred if they did, because looking like a rugged hero while being one is just more efficient branding. As they practiced, Will noticed someone hiding poorly in the bushes, so poorly that even a blind goblin might have spotted them. He approached kindly, greeting the clumsy dwarf and inviting him to join. Mennel, less subtle, charged in with an aggressive tone, scaring the poor observer off in a panic. Will shot Mennel a disapproving glare and scolded him, forcing the elf to apologize with a sheepish look. Later that day, Will made his way to the dwarves' settlement. He noticed how much respect the dwarves showed him, bowing and smiling, which left him a bit embarrassed. Will preferred fighting demons to enduring fan clubs. Finally, he met with Agnar, who introduced his grand-uncle, Grendir, the true elder and leader of the immigrants. After polite greetings, Will asked why they had come to Torchport. Grendir's answer nearly made Will spit out his tea. The elder calmly revealed they had come here to die. Will, struggling not to choke, listened in shock. Grendir explained that he was among the last survivors of the Iron Country, reduced now to ruins. The dwarves wished to die with their eyes fixed on their homeland, dreaming of reclaiming the Rust Mountains before their last breath. He begged Will to allow his people a small corner in Torchport where they could live out their days. Moved, Will clasped Grendir's hands and promised to protect them from injustice. The dwarf broke into tears, thanking him before recounting the tale of the Iron Country's fall. 200 years earlier, its last king, Arvangur, had ruled in peace, favoring the pen over the sword. But when demons invaded under the High King of the Eternals, an emissary arrived demanding their submission. Orvangur answered with steel, slaying the messenger. The severed head, in gruesome fashion, laughed and prophesied doom. Dragons would come and Valasurka would destroy all. Despite hopeless odds, Arvangur rallied his people, urging them to fight and die honorably in their ancestral mountains. Those who fled would carry on their memory. Grendir, who had witnessed it all, described the tragedy in painful detail. Will, hearing this, clenched his fists, his empathy for the dwarves burning hotter than fire. On his way back from the settlement, Will came across 2 men mercilessly beating the young dwarf he had seen earlier. Without hesitation, he intervened, scattering the bullies and carrying the battered youth to safety. When the dwarf awoke, he introduced himself as Rue. Will, relieved, remarked that he looked surprisingly okay for someone who had just been used as a punching bag. Rue smirked faintly, saying toughness was the one thing he had going for him. At the inn, Will apologized to the innkeeper for the commotion. She brushed it aside, mentioning her sick father. Will immediately healed the man, who thanked him by offering a warm meal. Outside, they discovered that Ryo had already repaired the broken door, hammering away diligently. Will, impressed, praised him, but Ryo dismissed his own efforts. Will gently urged him not to undervalue himself, to be strong and become his own greatest supporter. Over the meal, Will asked what Ryo had been doing out there. Hesitant, Ryo admitted he had recently migrated, trying to find his place. He admired Will openly, listening as Will spoke of his earlier meeting with Grendir and Agnar. Will encouraged him to be courageous, adding with a grin that even eating well and training daily could make a man stronger. Sage advice, though it did sound suspiciously like a gym membership pitch. Then, growing serious, Will said there must be a reason for their meeting and asked Ryo directly if he would like to become his Thane. Ryo blinked, unsure at first, but slowly, determination hardened in his eyes. Together, they returned to the dwarves' settlement, where Ryo was welcomed back warmly by his kin. The bond between him and his people was clear. He was cherished like a younger brother. Will explained himself to the gathered dwarves, apologizing for keeping Ryo along and making them worried. A senior dwarf named Gilroy stepped forward. After listening, he asked Will bluntly about his intentions. Will spoke clearly he wanted to make Ryo his vassal. The settlement erupted in outrage. Shocked voices rose at once, for being a Thane meant risking one's life beside a paladin on beast hunts and dangerous quests. It was not a small commitment. Amid the uproar, Will calmly turned to Ryo and asked what he truly wanted. Trembling but resolute, Ryo declared his desire to learn from Will and discover what it meant to be a warrior. He wanted to face challenges head-on and become someone worthy of pride. Kneeling, he swore his oath, asking Will to accept him as his Thane right there. In stunned silence, Will accepted. The dwarves looked on, some shaken, some in awe. Finally, Gilroy stepped forward once more, acknowledging Ryo's decision. He promised to explain the matter to Grendir and warned Ryo to be ready to lay down his life for Will if it came to it. Then, with a grave tone, he entrusted Ryo into Will's care, urging the paladin to guide the young dwarf wisely. Will, ever mindful of the people who chose to follow him, decided it was time to properly acknowledge Ryo's loyalty. He tried to discuss a salary with him, reasoning that effort should always be valued and that if he neglected it, others might see him as exploiting those under him. Ryo, flustered, admitted he was simply happy to serve. But Will stood firm, recalling advice that money was the simplest and clearest way to respect someone's work. In the end, Ryo reluctantly agreed, though it was plain his joy came from the service itself, not the coin. Training soon began, and Ryo quickly discovered that being the paladin's apprentice was a workout designed to shorten your lifespan. Will had him running laps until his lungs burned and his legs wobbled, yet the young dwarf's determination never faltered. Watching him struggle, Will found himself remembering Blood, Mary, and Gus, how much patience it must have taken to raise a human child in their strange world. He resolved to guide Ryo with the same devotion, alternating between physical conditioning and technique so the young dwarf wouldn't collapse after just one day. As the sessions ended, Ryo asked if he would have to be going through that routine every morning. Will says that they would alternate focus each day so training would not become unbearable. Ryo, hunched and panting, gave him a look that said, "Easy for you to say." In truth, he wanted Ryo to grow, not to collapse. He tells Ryo that later he'd like to practice swings with him and see his footwork and movements. When Will introduced him to Meneldor, Ryo braced himself nervously, still remembering the elf's prickly behavior. Yet Meneldor, in a rare show of humility, apologized sincerely for his earlier arrogance and Ryo relaxed. Will says Meneldor would be taking over whenever he was not around. With that, Will says he has to take care of something and leaves. Soon, Meneldor would be drilling Ryo with all the energy of a man who had just been given an excuse to boss someone around.
It's not fair!
Meanwhile, Will slipped away to tend to other matters, checking in at the tavern where Anna and her father were busy preparing for a festival. There, he ran into Gilroy, and they take a walk together. When Will asks why he was at the tavern, Gilroy says that he was tasked with providing the meat for the festival. Will asks if he's a hunter, but he admitted his mercenary roots and knack for hunting, traps, and survival skills. As they strolled together across a bridge overlooking Torchport, Gilroy opened up about his past, how he had been too green to join the Iron Country's last desperate battle and had lived ever since with the shame of a warrior who never earned his honor. He asked Will to help guide Ryo where he himself had failed. Will, moved by the plea, swore by the goddess that he would see it done. That evening, Will and Ryo are wrestling, and Will is encouraging and pushing Ryo to use his full strength and that surely he's got more in him. When he reached what seemed like his limit, Will uses a move to put him on the ground, telling him that getting used to the pain was part of the training too, but Ryo, bright-eyed like a child who just unboxed a new toy, asks Will how he did that. Will calls Meneldor, who had been watching, to come help. The next day, at his desk, Will penned a letter to Bishop Bagley for information on the Rust Mountains. his thoughts wandering to darker threats, Balasurka the dragon, and the gnawing fear that even a paladin might not survive another clash with a godlike being. He overhears Ryo and Metalldor fighting outside and watches, noticing that Ryo is getting stronger with each round. At dinner, Ryo could barely lift his spoon, but Will encouraged him to eat. Exhausted yet earnest, Ryo thanks Will for taking him in as his thane and for training him. Ryo finally shared his story, the noble family that had sheltered him, the parents he had lost, the life of softness that left him unprepared for hardship. He had always wondered if his protected existence was the right path, until he heard the songs of the paladin and resolved to follow in his footsteps. Now, serving Will felt like a dream realized. Will listened warmly but confessed that he could not truly teach him what courage was. It wasn't courage, he explained, to slay creatures you didn't fear. True courage was what you did when facing something you believed could defeat you. Ryo was still puzzled over this when Rystov finally returned and asked if he should report his findings to Anna. The grizzled warrior walked to Ryo, saying he had heard that Will had taken a new thane and he wasted no time adjusting Ryo's posture, warning that every servant of the paladin must carry themselves with confidence. Will promptly roped him into training Ryo as well, then casually dropped the bombshell question about the meaning of courage. Rystov, like a man dodging the last slice of pizza at a party, refused to give a clear answer, suggesting that if Will couldn't figure it out himself, no one could. With winter drawing closer, and with it came troubling news, Ryo had just put Will down while they were wrestling, and Anna arrived with reports of undead near the burial grounds. Will chose to investigate personally, taking Ryo with him. As they trekked through the somber graveyard, Ryo tensed at the looming figure of a gravekeeper statue. But Will explained its purpose, to ward off thieves, and reassured him that those buried here had been given proper rites and so could not rise as undead. Unlike Stagnate's kindness, which had once turned death itself into a nuisance for the living, this rest was true peace. Their search brought them to a small cave hidden nearby. With torches lit, they pressed into its depths, the air damp and heavy with mold. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere grew. Finally, in the shadowed heart of the chamber, a presence stirred. A shape coalesced, familiar in its malice, and a crow's eyes gleamed from the darkness, asking if it's really been 2 years already. Will stiffened. He knew this aura, this voice, this god. It was Stagnate. The air within the cavern felt thick and heavy, the shadows pressing close as if they wanted to strangle the light from Will's torch. Will was ready to attack, weapons drawn, when she told them there would be no battle today and that they'd win if they fought. She had not come as an enemy, but as a herald, a messenger of divine truth. Will frowned. Suspicion etched across his face. Every encounter with this god of the undead had been a dance with danger, and he found little comfort in the god's apology for the rash behavior of the echo they had faced before. Stagnate says that, thanks to the utter trashing Will gave her last time, she can't send an echo no matter how hard she tried, saying she had no choice but to send a herald. Newborn echoes are like infants, Stagnate admitted, a rare tinge of shame coloring her words, stating that they act on raw impulse. And that was not her intention. Will didn't relax his stance, and said she should stop beating around and get to the point. The god's smile deepened, and with a glance, the world itself seemed to shudder. Will fell to the ground. A vision pierced into Will's mind like a spear of light. His knees buckled under the weight of it, his body trembling. It seems the vision is that Will will be defeated and die while fighting in vain the dragon, Balasurka. If he doesn't believe it, he is free to consult Gracefield. Stagnate is telling him this because she loves humans and especially heroes. It'll be a pity to see him dead. She further adds that before she turned to the evil side, she met Balasurka once. He fought for no beliefs but for victory and plunder. Narrating more about his deeds, especially when he was hired by demons as a mercenary 200 years ago. Balasurka was deeply wounded in that battle and fell into slumber. He confirms to Ryo that Arvangar was a true hero. He managed to take an eye from the dragon before his demise. This makes Ryo emotional as his ancestors' heroics were true. Ryo's heart surged with pride and grief, tears brimming as the stories of his childhood suddenly solidified into truth. His family's songs were no exaggerations, their heroics were real. He trembled as Stagnate told him to be proud of his heritage. But before anyone could breathe in the weight of those revelations, the earth itself shook. A roar split the cavern like thunder, rolling out into the woods beyond. Their bones quaked with it. Stagnate's tone hardened, a warning dripping in her words. The dragon's sleep was getting more shallow. She told them to rush home. Chaos was imminent. As Will and Ryo rushed from the burial site, chaos greeted them. Shadows burst alive with monsters driven wild by the echo of that roar. Will cut them down with swift strikes, steady even as Ryo stood his ground too. When a beast nearly sank claws into the young dwarf's back, Will slayed it, his calm presence a lifeline. Then the ground shook with heavier steps and a forest giant emerged. Normally gentle as old oak, it now raged mindlessly, towering over them with a bellow that rattled the canopy. Rue froze, too terrified to move. Will stepped forward with a grim smile. Instead of cutting the giant down, he grappled it. Yes, grappled. The sight alone was enough to make Rue forget how to breathe. The paladin stretched his hand to its head. Gracefield's blessing flared like dawn breaking, calming its frenzy until its eyes softened with reason again. The giant, naming himself Gang, lowered his great head in gratitude. He promised to move his kin to safety and heed the warning. Stagnate warns as she prepares to leave. This had been luck. When the dragon fully awakened, brute force would not be enough. Thousands of lives could be lost. Will would be able to save so much more if he doesn't fight the dragon. Back in Torchport, the aftershocks were immediate. Adventurers scrambled through streets, rushing to defend villages, slay maddened beasts, and heal the wounded. Will issued orders swiftly, but inside dread coiled. If Valasurka rose now, it wouldn't be just Beastwoods that fell, it would be White Sails and everything beyond. A letter arrived from Bishop Bagley, laced with his usual bitter wit, suggesting Will could always run away. Will let out a bitter laugh, part at the irony, part because Bagley always had the worst timing for jokes. Still, the weight pressed harder on his chest. There on his office table, he bowed his head and prayed to Gracefield, begging for guidance. But before he could finish his prayer, Menildor burst in with urgent news uproar outside. Will looked out his window to find Rue in the square, standing firm as dwarves shouted all around him. They demanded to fight the dragon, insisting on dying as their ancestors had. Death in battle was better, they argued, than living in fear. Rue's voice cracked as he tried reason, but when words failed, he used fists. Rendir barked that they wanted to die with their king and tried to overpower Rue, but he put the old dwarf down and he floored each dwarf who challenged him, proving with bruises what words could not. Rue answered back, shouting that they had misunderstood. Their ancestors fought to win, not to die needlessly. Then Rue made his stand. Lifting his head, he revealed his bloodline. Vindalfur, grandson of Arvangar, last king of the Iron Country. His name rang like thunder through the gathering, silencing all. From the balcony, Will stepped forward, heart swelling with pride. He praised Rue and called him by his now revealed real name Vindalfur for his courage and declared that he would face Valasurka. He asked Vindalfur to stand at his side, and the young dwarf accepted with unshaken resolve. Menildor steps in, saying they won't need numbers but a small party. Menildor mentions that they'll need a guide, someone who was actually at the mountain 200 years ago. Gelreis offered to guide them, choosing to spare Grendir for the sake of leading their people. Rastov walks in, vowing his strength. He says he saw a crowd gathering and came to find out what was going on. Will says that they're at a disadvantage and asks if they still wish to follow him. They all agree to follow through. The next morning, Anna tells Rastov to be careful as he sets out. Bee, of course, danced about Will and gleefully declared she would write the song of the Paladin's great battle, though she half-joked she hoped it wouldn't end as a tragedy. And then Tonio burst in, panting hard, but proudly announced that he had stocked up every supply Will could possibly need. Tonio tells Will to let him know if there's any other thing he'd need. And Will says there's one big favor he'd like to ask. That night, Will's exhaustion dragged him into sleep. There in the haze, Gracefield appeared, radiant and solemn. She confessed she did not want him to die, but she knew his vow was firm. If he was to face Valasurka, then she would bless him with all her light. Warmth enveloped him, urging him to carry courage in his heart. And so, the paladin slept beneath the shadow of destiny, knowing that dawn would draw him one step closer to the dragon's roar. The morning of their departure carried the weight of destiny. Will woke with determination renewed, the blessing of Gracefield still burning in his heart, and a steady presence of allies who had chosen to follow him into the jaws of legend. The people of Torchport lined the docks to see them off, their faces streaked with tears but lifted with pride. Farewells rippled among the companions. Antonio, as efficient as ever, shaking Will's hand, tells him he has arranged the special request he had asked for. Then he said his goodbyes. The dwarfs surrounded Rue, bidding him farewell. While Grendir and Gelreis exchanged firm handshakes, all respect glinting in their eyes, Rastov spoke quietly with Anna, who tried to smile but could not fully mask her fear. Menildor parted from Bee, telling her to look forward to the stories he'll bring back. They all board the boat and Will. The river carried them onward, oars dipping in rhythm to the pulse of anticipation. Will stood at the helm, silent and focused. At night, Will suddenly called a halt, guiding them ashore at a secluded bend. To the confusion of his comrades, they switched places with Marcus and his men, who had been waiting in the shadows. The plan became clear as Will explained. Demons were surely shadowing their steps, waiting at the obvious front gates. Marcus and his men would act as doubles, decoys to draw the enemy's attention, while Will's true party slipped quietly upriver to strike from the rear. It was a bold gambit, classic Will, mixing pragmatism with just enough recklessness to terrify Rue. Menildor uses fairy magic to conceal their presence as they board a new boat and makes them move faster. By Menildor's calculations, they should be there by morning. The young dwarf's unease grew as they drifted deeper into the tributary, but when Menildor tried to calm his nerves, he explained that ahead lay a lakeside town taken by the High King, a cursed place where even veteran adventurers vanished into mists of magic. Meneldor gave him a reassuring smile, only for Will to casually admit that he had in fact grown up there. The revelation left his companions stunned, Meneldor especially, since apparently Will had forgotten to mention that his childhood home was basically a magical fog hazard on every adventurer's blacklist. As they neared the ruins, a dense, eerie fog curled around the river. The others tensed, but Will only sighed, recognizing the handiwork. This was Gus's magic, high-level maze wards that once protected both home and academy. Drawing on the lessons of his childhood, he parted the haze with his own spell word, clearing the fog and revealing the shores. Awe flickered in the other's eyes, but that awe turned to quiet sorrow when the boat emerged into what remained of the town. Broken walls, overgrown streets, and silence pressed down on them, ghosts of laughter long gone. When they got ashore, Meneldor urged Will to go on ahead, and he did not hesitate. He sprinted ahead into the ruins, racing past familiar ruins until he reached the gravestones of Blood and Mary. Kneeling, he whispered prayers, saying he brought his companions home. From there, he stormed toward the temple, heart hammering, calling for Gus. For a moment, dread threatened to crush him. The old mage did not answer. Just as despair crept in, Gus shows up and, of course, immediately startling Will just for the fun of it. The reunion was everything one would expect when your undead grandfather figure is a snarky sorcerer. Instead of heartfelt tears, Gus's first concern was whether Will was making money. Will, of course, puffed up proudly, declaring that not only was he thriving, but he was no longer some penniless orphan, he was a paladin and the lord of his own town. Gus naturally teased him for not having a girlfriend yet, noting with mock disappointment that Will had apparently only collected comrades and responsibility, not romance. Nothing like being roasted by the person who raised you. The companions soon joined them, and Gus was given the full story. When he heard they intended to slay Valasurka, his sharp eyes widened, his disbelief plain. He reminded them that this was no ordinary dragon, it was a mercenary relic from the God's own era, a beast that once fought for demon armies and reduced kingdoms to ash. Fighting it was suicide. Gus suggested bargaining with Valasurka since it was a merc. Will listened quietly, then explained with grim clarity that there was no bargaining with such a creature. If left unchecked, Valasurka would bring nothing but ruin. Gus shook his head at the stubborn resolve, but recognized the fire that could not be extinguished. Gus introduces himself to Will's companions and tells them to make themselves at home. Gelry steps forward and reintroduces himself to Gus, revealing that he had once been one of the dwarven soldiers Gus and his companions saved 2 centuries before. Gratitude softened the warrior's hard features, and Gus clearly remembered every detail. Later, Will wandered into a familiar room. Memories of Blood, Mary, and Gus filled his thoughts, only for Meneldor to appear and remark how Gus seemed to know everything about them already. Will chuckled, saying, "Gus is amazing." Later, Will cornered Gus to press for more knowledge about Valasurka. The mage explained that he had never met the dragon before and would have liked to bargain with it. Gus told Will that if he intended to fight Valasurka, he should aim for old wounds. Will asks if words of obliteration would work, but Gus says only if they land. Gus was blunt. In a fight of magic, Will would lose, and in close combat, he would die even faster. Stagnate's earlier warning suddenly felt heavier, yet Will did not falter. Gus suggested using an ambush to attack the dragon, but also mentioned that the dragon was using the demons as an early warning system. Gus told him he'd die, and he responded by telling Gus that running was not truly living. There was a difference between being alive and merely not being dead. It was a grim line, but one that showed his resolve. Though he tried to discourage Will, Gus could not deny him. With a resigned sigh, he led the group into a hidden chamber. With a gesture, ancient wards melted away, revealing a secret armory filled with relics, the weapons and armor of heroes who had once stood against the High King and fallen. Gus recalled the brave souls who once wielded them. Each companion chose their weapon carefully. Rastov, ever practical, requested a special enchantment for his blade, ensuring it would not shatter when faced with the impossible. While enchanting Rastov's sword, Menel drops in holding a bow and asks who it belongs to. Gus says it belongs to Telperion the Silver String and asks if Menel is related to him. Menel says they're distantly related. Menel says he'll take the bow. Will asks Gus if he can bring a troubadour girl B over when they return from the Iron Mountains, telling Gus he would one day return with B so the old mage could share all these stories properly. Gus, immediately assuming B was Will's beloved, nearly burst with excitement until Will clarified she was just a friend. Gus's exaggerated heartbreak filled the room. Grandpa might be an undead curmudgeon, but he had his priorities. Will passed a stiletto dagger to Rue, telling him it once belonged to his father. Rue froze, clearly reluctant to accept something so precious, but Will wasn't taking no for an answer. He explained that his father had already given him so much in life, and in his mind this dagger would serve Rue better than it would collecting dust with him. Later that day, after the others wandered off to look for food, Will and Rue stayed behind at camp, doing the kind of chores that always make you wonder why heroes never seem to be shown doing laundry. While they worked, Rue opened up. He admitted that sometimes he wished he hadn't been born with royal blood at all. Instead of a crown and all its heavy burdens, he dreamed about something simple, like being born into a family that owned a workshop, where the biggest problem in life would be fixing a broken stool leg or making sure the shelves didn't collapse. Will laughed at that, not mockingly, but in a way that showed he understood. He confessed that if their positions were switched, he would probably be the one wishing for royalty. After all, the grass always looks greener on the other side, even if sometimes it's full of weeds. Still, Ryo couldn't shake his worry. He admitted he felt like he was dragging Will into his personal problems, that his presence was more of a burden than a blessing. Will stopped him immediately. He explained that he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly what he was facing. If he didn't fight, he wouldn't be able to look his parents in the eye, or Gus, or even himself in the mirror. He wanted to live a life he could be proud of so that when the time came to return to the goddess, he could honestly say he had given everything he had. Running from the dragon wasn't an option. And to make it clear, he told Ryo that truthfully, it was because of him that he had made this decision in the first place. He even thanked him for giving him that strength. Ryo was touched to the core. He swore right then and there that no matter what happened, he would never regret his choices. Will nodded with a small smile, telling him he was counting on him. It wasn't the kind of thing you say lightly. Both of them knew their words carried real weight. Just then, Menildor returned, carrying a deer he had hunted. They prepared it and served the party later that evening. And of course, Menel couldn't resist poking fun at Rystov and Gelreis for their total failure at fishing. The two had spent all that time by the river and not a single fish had been caught. Menildor got a deer and they got wet boots. That night, Will dreamed. He remembered Mary, who asked him if he feared her. He told her he didn't, and she reassured him that he would eventually grow used to the way humans looked and lived. His companions might not look like them, but they would be human, and that bond would be enough. The dream shifted, and blood appeared. Blood warned him that valor was a double-edged sword. It could be a great strength, but it could also become a curse. There would be times when he couldn't give up, even if holding on meant certain death. Blood reminded him that he had only taught him to fight because it was the only skill he truly knew. If that ever caused Will pain, then he should feel free to hate him for it. But Will refused. He said there was no way he could ever hate Blood, not after everything. Will woke later that night still carrying the weight of those memories and made his way to the gravestones of Mary and Blood. Standing there in silence, he expressed his gratitude for the friends he had made and the strength he had gained because of them. He admitted that things felt tough without them, and he recalled their final parting words. As he turned to leave, he found Gus waiting for him. Will told Gus he was leaving in the morning. Gus gave his warning. Valasurka was no ordinary dragon, but a war-hardened beast that thrived in chaos. Gus told him he was probably the only one who truly posed a threat to it. When Will admitted he didn't feel strong enough, Gus offered the most practical option, run. But Will shook his head. Doing nothing was meaningless. He wouldn't run. Gus cautioned him again, reminding him that this was their best chance to strike before Valasurka fully healed and awakened. Though Gus desperately wished to join them, he admitted he would be no help. Will told him it was all right. He could stay behind with Mary and Blood. By morning, the group was back on the river. Will studied the map carefully while Menildor suggested they take a tributary to avoid known dangers. To make things safer, Menildor summoned sylphs to guide their path and layered spells to mask their presence and speed them up. As they traveled, Will asked Gelreis what he knew about the lands ahead. Gelreis spoke of the ancient elven forest of Lothor, which had a complicated history with the Iron Country. Long ago, conflicts had broken out over logging rights. Menildor chimed in with a similar story from his own homeland. Gelreis sighed, lamenting how such tensions could so easily spiral into violence. Despite that, he said the elves had left a lasting impression, especially their songs and spirit arts, which the dwarves of the Iron Mountain still respected to this day. Their conversation was cut short when the boat slipped into a bank of gray mist. Menildor frowned, saying the scenery felt familiar. Will asked if this was the work of words of taboo. Menildor explained that since the elves had sealed themselves off in this forest, the demons had used words of taboo to rot it from within. Menildor's voice hardened. He suggested destroying all the demons outright. The group sensed danger and prepared for battle, and sure enough, serpents burst out of the water. They came from every side, darting through the murky river like arrows. Menildor tried using his sylph magic to speed up the boat, but the spell dragged, too slow to save them. Will ordered everyone to take positions. In the chaos, one serpent managed to pull Will into the river. He thrashed beneath the water but managed to slip free, climbing back onto the boat soaked and gasping. After catching his breath, he unleashed a powerful spell that wiped out every serpent nearby. The water turned red, and dead snakes floated to the surface like the world's worst soup. Rystov studied the map again and noticed something odd. The river seemed to have swallowed part of the forest. The terrain no longer matched the map. Curious, they explored further and found structures submerged. Will asked Gelreis if he recognized them. The dwarf admitted he couldn't be sure, but the architecture was clearly elven. Rystov pointed out where they were, and Menildor noted that the Fae in this area had grown weak. He couldn't summon the forest spirits, but he could still draw on forest powers. Rystov warned against it, worried they would draw in more demons. Will handed out paddles instead, and they pressed on cautiously. Before long, ghostly hands reached from the water, clutching at the boat. The dead souls seemed desperate to drag them down. Will prayed to Gracefield, asking the goddess to guide the lost spirits to peace. His prayer was answered as an elf spirit appeared and pointed the way forward. They heard a scream in the distance, and Meneldor then offered his own prayer to the Maiden of Water, asking for her blessing. With her aid, he glided swiftly across the surface of the river in the scream's direction while the others paddled behind. Their path brought them to a terrifying sight, a hydra attacking a young girl. Meneldor rushed immediately to her aid while the others fought the hydra. The beast lashed out with multiple heads, but they slashed, burned, and split their way through the monstrous creature. When it was finally defeated, Meneldor urged Will to heal the girl. Will hesitated, worried his prayer might fail if she resisted, but at last, the girl accepted his help and Will's prayer restored her health. The party was back on their way across the river, the boat gliding through dark waters that seemed far too eager to swallow them whole. Meneldor, ever the trickster, decided this was the perfect time to wake the elf girl. Without hesitation, he pressed a bottle against her lips. The poor girl, startled out of her unconsciousness, jolted awake in pure anger, glaring as if she'd just been kissed against her will. And in typical Meneldor fashion, he grinned mischievously and claimed exactly that he had in fact kissed her. The look on her face was priceless. She flushed red, embarrassed and furious at the same time. Before she could throw him into the river, Meneldor admitted it had only been a bottle of wine, not a kiss. An apology came, though it was hard to tell if he was truly sorry. At least he introduced himself properly this time, trying to salvage what little etiquette he had. The girl, still flustered, finally calmed down and gave her own name, Dyneland. She thanked the group for saving her life. When her eyes turned toward Will, she asked if he was their leader. Upon his confirmation, she bowed and offered him a more formal expression of gratitude. Apparently saving someone from being eaten by a hydra earns you official thanks in elven culture. Who knew? But that gratitude turned to horror when she learned their true mission. They told her they were planning to slay the dragon Valasurka. She asked in disbelief, her voice rising as she asked if it was really just the 5 of them. They nodded, dead serious, while Will admitted that yes, it was reckless, suicidal even, but they had no other choice. Curious, Will asked Dyneland why she had been fighting the Hydra alone. She hesitated, clearly reluctant to share, and simply said it was a long story. Meneldor, sensing her unease, suggested they eat first, because nothing eases trauma like bread, meat, and a side of awkward silence. They offered her some food, and Rue, recalling what he knew of elven customs, politely asked if she could even eat meat. Dyneland explained that while elves generally avoided it, exceptions were made for those who had undergone intense spiritual training. When Meneldor pointed out her thin frame, she admitted she hadn't eaten in days. She explained that elves prided themselves on never abandoning the weak, even at their own expense. Will was moved by her resolve and asked if she could take them to her village. Dyneland agreed. As they traveled deeper into the forest, the surroundings grew darker. The air felt heavier, and even Meneldor's sharp eyes noticed that something beyond demon magic was at work here. Dyneland revealed the truth. It was the miasma of the evil dragon itself, seeping into the forest year by year, corrupting it like rot spreading through wood. Rue asked how the dragon's corruption could reach so far when its lair was deep within the mountains. Dyneland explained that the corruption spread through ancient tunnels dug long ago by dwarves, though she was quick to assure Rue that it wasn't their fault. Evil, apparently, is just really good at finding shortcuts. When they arrived at Dyneland's village, the sight was heartbreaking. The elves were frail, sick, and hopeless. Their food, air, and water were poisoned because the power of the Fae had weakened. Dyneland solemnly welcomed them below his door, though it hardly looked like the proud homeland of legend. Will wasted no time. He immediately offered to help. He asked that all the sick villagers be gathered in one place, and using his divine powers, he healed them. The atmosphere shifted at once. Sorrow gave way to joy. Despair gave way to hope. The villagers wept, smiled, and clung to life again. Will, drained from the effort, sank onto a branch to catch his breath. That was when Stagnate appeared, again in the form of a crow. Because why be intimidating when you can be annoying instead? She urged Will to abandon his mission, warning him that facing the dragon meant certain death. Will refused flatly. Stagnate then tried tempting him, offering him the role of her right-hand man, the chance to defeat the dragon and then, why not, conquer the entire world. A very generous offer if you're in the market for global domination. Will, however, politely declined. He reaffirmed that he was her enemy, though he added that he respected her in a strange way. Stagnate, frustrated, departed with one final ominous prediction of his death. The next morning, Will awoke to the sound of Dyneland and Meneldor arguing loudly. Without missing a beat, he teased them, calling it a lover's quarrel. Both denied the accusation immediately, Meneldor snapping that she wasn't even good-looking, and Dyneland snapping back with words so sharp they probably countered his verbal magic. At one point, she called him an ektakako niragamose, whatever that means, while he returned the favor with onomak nag. Frankly, no one knew what they were saying, but the insult sounded creative enough to sting. With their bickering settled for the moment, Will and Menildor made plans to confront the demon beast directly and restore the Forest Lord. Menildor insisted on using his Forest Lord abilities. Dylan tried to stop them, saying Will had already done too much. She explained that this territory belonged to demons and venturing further was extremely dangerous. But the group's resolve was set in stone. Dylan finally agreed, saying she would gather the best of Lothdor's warriors to accompany them. Together with Dylan and her chosen fighters, the party pushed deeper into the forest. They fought wave after wave of demon beasts, their battle fierce but determined. At last, they reached the Lord of the Forest, or what was left of it, a once mighty tree, now riddled with demon beast eggs, as if corruption itself had laid claim to it. Menildor stepped forward with calm determination. Using his powers, he purified the tree, cleansing it of its corruption and purging the forest of its taint. Dylan watched in awe, impressed not only by his strength but also by the beauty of the act itself. As the group rested, Dylan quietly questioned Will's resolve. She pointed out that their actions here might draw even more demons down upon them. But Will stood firm. Ignoring a threat would only lead to greater suffering. Determined, he asked her to show them the nearest underground tunnel leading to the Rust Mountains, where the dragon resided. Dylan offered to accompany them, but Will declined. He explained that her presence and her peoples would only slow them down because they were weak. With a heavy heart, Dylan agreed. She led them to the nearest tunnel, the West Gate. At the entrance to the Iron Country, Rue knocked. The gates creaked open, granting them passage, but before they could take a single step inside, a wave of evil aura surged outward. The sheer pressure brought them to their knees, a chilling preview of the nightmare waiting within. Will whispered a prayer to Gracefield, and only by her blessing did they rise again. But there was no mistaking it. Valacirca had already noticed their arrival. The tunnel's shadow loomed ahead, vast and suffocating. And so, our brave companions pressed onward, each step carrying them deeper into danger. Behind them, Dylan stood at the gate praying for their success and vowing that one day she would repay her debt. Because when you head into a dragon's den, you don't just need weapons, you need prayers, good luck, and a very questionable sense of humor. The group pressed forward through the suffocating tunnels, their footsteps echoing faintly against the damp stone. The air was heavy with miasma, so thick it seemed to cling to their lungs, and even though Will's anti-poison spell dulled some of the worst of it, the place still felt awful. Rue muttered that no amount of magic could make this stench or gloom feel normal. The oppressive darkness gave the unsettling impression that anything could crawl out from above, behind, or even the walls themselves. Will warned everyone to stay sharp, reminding them that demon ambushes weren't limited to the ground. Some could skitter on walls or swoop down from the ceiling like very unwelcome bats. Menildor, ever watchful, suddenly pointed out a trap buried ahead, his keen senses saving them from a potentially painful oops. He disabled it with a flicker of skill. The party pushed on with frayed nerves, every step feeling like it carried the weight of an ambush waiting to pounce. After a while of trudging through gloom, Will tried to break the tension with a half-joking remark about how oddly uneventful things had been. No demons yet, almost disappointing considering all the hype about these tunnels. Menildor was less amused, suggesting grimly that the silence probably meant the enemy was gathering in the Hall of Stone, waiting to drop a very unfriendly welcome party on them. Before long, his sharp elven ears twitched at an eerie noise ahead. The group tensed, weapons raised, hearts braced for demons. Will said that he and Gelreis would go in first with their shields up. He gave the others their orders too. When they barged in, what they saw wasn't demons. It was worse in its own way, an army of skeletal warriors, dwarves long reduced to bones, their armor rusted but their spirits unbroken. Their bones rattled as they marched, spectral echoes of a war that should have ended centuries ago. They still believed they were fighting, still waiting to defend their fallen kingdom. At first, they didn't know what to make of the intruders until their empty sockets locked onto Gelreis, and something in their undead memory recognized him. That recognition nearly cracked the grim facade. It was Vindalfer Rue who stepped forward, his voice steady but heavy with grief. He broke the news none of them wanted to hear. Iron Country had fallen, their king was long dead, and the world they fought to protect was gone. The skeletons clutched their weapons as if denial alone could undo time. But Vindalfer didn't stop there. He lifted his chin, declared himself as Orbangru's grandson, and promised to reclaim their homeland in his name. He urged them to rest, assuring them their duty had been fulfilled beyond measure. It was a speech that rang with both pain and conviction, and slowly, the spectral warriors lowered their arms. One by one, the army faded into nothingness, crossing into peace at last. The group pressed forward, and the demons finally made their move. Hordes came slithering and clawing from the shadows, but compared to what they'd just faced spiritually, these small fry were almost a relief. They fought through wave after wave until at last they burst into the Hall of Stone, and there, sitting arrogantly upon the throne, was the demon general Scarabaeus. His form radiated malice, an aura that marked him as something far above the fodder they'd cut down earlier. Vindalfur stepped forward immediately, demanding the right to face him alone. This was his battle, his kingdom's throne, and his burden. Will, trusting his resolve, gave his approval. Meneldor, of course, looked like he was ready to pull his hair out. Leaving a friend to duel a demon general alone was madness, but before he could argue further, Scarabaeus solved the debate for them, summoning a flood of demons that forced the rest of the party to fight for their own survival. The throne room dissolved into chaos. While Will, Meneldor, Raistov, and Gelreis hacked their way through swarming demons, Vindalfur charged headfirst into his duel. At first, it went badly. Scarabaeus' strikes pummeled him, the bug-like general moving with crushing ferocity. Vindalfur stumbled, bloodied and outmatched, his heritage and pride suddenly seeming like fragile shields against the reality of battle. But he refused to break. Fueled by the memory of his ancestors and the promise he'd made, Vindalfur pushed past his pain. His attacks grew sharper, his movements steadier, until at last he unleashed a final strike that tore through the bug general's defenses. Scarabaeus fell, crushed by Vindalfur's fury. Across the hall, the rest of the party finally cut down the last of the demons. The room fell into a breathless silence. For one glorious moment, it felt like victory. Will stepped forward, retrieved the crown that symbolized the throne, and placed it in Vindalfur's hands. The young dwarf, however, shook his head. He would accept it only when the Iron Kingdom was truly restored, not before. But before their spirits could truly settle, Will's instincts prickled. Something was wrong. Scarabaeus' corpse wasn't turning to dust like the others. Worse, it wasn't where they left it. The demon had crawled away, dragging its shattered body into the darkness. The group followed the trail uneasily until they stumbled into a cavern thick with miasma. And there he was, Scarabaeus, broken, writhing, desperate for aid. Before they could react, the cavern shook. A massive paw slammed down, crushing the general like a bug. The earth itself seemed to quake under the weight of what followed. Out of the shadows, it emerged. Vast, terrifying, scales glistening like black steel and eyes burning with ancient hunger. Valasurka the dragon, not a rumor, not a dream, not a half-sleeping shadow of history, but in the flesh, or in the scales rather. The cavern was no longer theirs. It was his lair, his bedchamber, and he made that very clear as his voice rumbled like thunder, welcoming them with the kind of greeting I promised they'd all regret stepping foot inside. The cavern shook with a suffocating tension as the group braced themselves. Before them stood the great dragon Valasurka, its massive form blotting out the chamber's light, scales glistening with ancient menace. The beast's eyes glowed with intelligence older than kingdoms, and when it finally spoke, its deep voice rolled through the stone like thunder. The dragon demanded their names. No one answered. The weight of his presence froze them all in place. Even Will, who was usually the one to step forward first, found his throat completely dry and his knees weak. His body betrayed him. His hands trembled, his chest tightened, and his mind felt like it had shut down. It wasn't courage that held him still, it was paralyzing fear. For the first time in a long while, the paladin was speechless. This was an overwhelming predator. And then, as if reaching from the depths of his soul, Mary's voice echoed in his memory. Her teaching had always been simple: denial of fear doesn't make it go away. True courage begins with accepting it. Those words broke through the fog. Will forced himself to breathe, to steady his shaking hands, and in that small victory, his courage sparked. So instead of blurting out his name, Will raised his head and, calm but firm, asked the dragon to introduce itself first. A bold move, considering this wasn't a polite dinner party, but a cavern full of miasma with a god-slaying dragon looming over them. The dragon obliged. It introduced itself as Valasurka, the sickle of the gods, a being born from the dying embers of a star, a creature eternal, bound to miasma and sulfur, whose very existence carried the weight of calamities past. With the name revealed, Will gathered himself and responded in kind. He called himself William G. Merryblood, son of heroes, disciple of the light, and paladin of Gracefield. His voice no longer trembled, and in that moment, he stood tall in front of the dragon. Valasurka reacted with unexpected nostalgia. He recalled the old heroes and seemed almost amused that their legacy lived on in this young paladin. Then, to everyone's shock, the dragon made an offer. Not a threat, not yet, but an offer. He said he had no problem serving Will. If Will wished, he could make Valasurka his servant. The dragon's power under his command. Will froze. For a fleeting moment, the temptation was real. The thought of wielding such overwhelming strength was dizzying. Imagine it, a dragon at your side, enemies scattering like ants, but something about the way Valasurka said it felt wrong, like the kind of bargain that comes with small print written in blood. Valasurka gave him two options. Accept the offer and usher in peace, or refuse and die here. A simple choice, he claimed, though the oppressive aura pressing down on Will made simple feel impossible. Yet Will gave his response. He said in a few years, Valasurka would kill him and change loyalties again. The dragon burst out laughing. Will was correct, he said, but also added that it's not such a bad deal. Will was gasping for breath, trying to figure out the right thing to do, and then warmth filled him. Gracefiel's presence touched his soul, silent but steady, reminding him that he wasn't alone. With her reassurance, his mind cleared. He tells Rastov, Gelreis, Menel, and Rue to get ready. Standing firm, Will rejected Valasurka's terms. He told the dragon that the choice wasn't his to make, but Valasurka's. Either the dragon could change its ways and live under Gracefiel's protection, or it could continue down its path of destruction and face judgment. Will even went so far as to swear that if Valasurka truly chose change, he would protect the dragon from every enemy as long as he lived. Valasurka paused, his wings stirring the cavern air into a gale. He praised Will for solving the riddle. The paladin was no reckless boy showing off strength, nor a coward clinging to life. His answer marked him as a true hero, worthy of being placed alongside those of old. And yet, Valasurka refused. The dragon declared that destruction was his nature. Without wars, disasters, and heroes to challenge him, what meaning would he have? He was calamity incarnate and he would not change. And with that, the only option left was battle. The fight began with Will charging in, spear in hand. He struck true, but just as Gus had warned, the dragon's scales were impenetrable. Even Blood, in his prime, would have struggled. But Will didn't falter. He remembered Gus's words, to strike at old wounds, and with every ounce of strength he had, he managed a precise cut, a small victory, but a spark of hope. The rest of the party joined the fray. Meneldor's arrows, Rastov's blade, Gelreis's axe, and Rue's determination all came together in perfect coordination. The teamwork drove Valasurka back, forcing even the mighty dragon onto the defensive, making it acknowledge their coordination. Will unleashed his trump card, chaining the dragon with Gus's deadliest incantation. A devastating spell of light engulfed the beast, pulling it into a swirling void. With a blinding explosion, Valasurka vanished, leaving behind a crater. Relief spread, but it was uneasy. The victory felt hollow, too quick, too clean. Will's gut twisted. This couldn't be it. And he was right. A sudden gale swept through the cavern, stronger than before. The group was thrown back, the air ripped from their lungs. From the depths of the darkness, Valasurka returned. Not destroyed, transformed. His form shifted, reshaping, his body adapting to fit where no dragon should have fit. Words of transformation. Suddenly, it all made sense. This was how he had entered the underground kingdom in the first place. Will's heart sank. This dragon had survived countless wars, adapted to every battlefield, and mastered words of creation themselves. Every spell, every tactic, every force that had ever been thrown at him, Valasurka had endured and overcome. And now, even after their strongest attacks, after chaining him, after unleashing the deadliest magic, the dragon still stood. Worse, Will's companions began to collapse one by one, their strength spent. At last, only Will remained standing, staring down the ancient monster whose power had defied gods and heroes alike. Valasurka's enormous form loomed over them, radiating pure malice. His golden eyes burned like molten suns as he finally spoke again, his words cutting through the cavern with the weight of doom itself. He commended Will for lasting this long, almost like a twisted compliment from a teacher to a student who should have failed hours ago. But there was no kindness in his voice, only cruelty dressed as praise. Then came the proposition. Valasurka offered Will a deal: serve him, bow to his power, and maybe, just maybe, his comrades would be spared. The catch? If Will refused, Valasurka promised to burn not just their bodies but their very souls, reducing his friends into nothingness. The dragon clearly enjoyed dangling that horror before him, savoring every flicker of torment in Will's face. But Will didn't flinch. He had walked into this battle knowing the risks. His resolve had already been forged in fire and shadow. Seeing no fear to exploit, Valasurka made another chilling offer. If Will truly wanted to protect his friends, there was an easy solution: kill himself, take his own life, and the dragon swore his companions would live. Peace through self-destruction. Efficient, if a little dramatic. Of course, Will wasn't buying it. The paladin had faced death too many times to let it write the script. With his voice steady and unyielding, he declared he would never yield to the dragon's demands. His friends knew the risks, just as he did, and if it meant fighting until his last breath, then so be it. The dragon smirked, amused by such defiance. With a deep growl, he warned again that Will's comrades would die screaming. Will's answer? They had come prepared for that. If they had to fall, they'd do so fighting. So yes, the plan was simple. Will was going to hit the dragon 1,000,000 times until he died, promising to show the dragon just how stubborn he can be. Not exactly elegant, but hey, sometimes brute persistence is all you've got. And with that, the battle roared back to life. Will lunged forward using an acceleration spell, spear in hand, aiming for the dragon's old wound. He used a web spell to stop the dragon from breathing fire at him, but he had to cancel the attack to evade a counter from the dragon. His next step was to draw the dragon's attention from his companions. He then unleashed a lightning spell on the dragon, but Valasurka was left unfazed from the attack, laughing at Will's futile attempts. They keep going at it till Will's shield is all messed up from the barrage of attacks from the dragon. He uses his acceleration spell to speed up the dragon's body and strike it in between its scales with his spear. He struck true, But the victory was short-lived. His trusted spear, Pale Moon, shattered in his hands, splintered against those monstrous scales. Now weaponless, he drew the cursed blade Overeater, knowing it was dangerous, knowing it might even consume him, but at this point, it was all or nothing. Unfortunately, Valakirka wasn't some mindless beast. He had fought gods and heroes for centuries, and he already knew Overeater's tricks and weaknesses. The dragon changed tactics, no more close-range fighting. Every attempt Will made to get close was thwarted. And then came the inevitable. The dragon inhaled, flames building in its chest. The cavern shook with the sound of destruction ready to be unleashed. Will braced himself for death. But at the very last moment, light broke through. A herald descended from Gracefield, shielding Will from the inferno with divine radiance. The flames crashed like a tidal wave, but the barrier held. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. Valakirka sneered. A single herald? Fleeting, fragile. One god couldn't change anything. With brutal force, he shattered the divine shield and sent Will flying, hurling him across the battlefield like a rag doll. And yet, even then, the dragon acknowledged Will's tenacity. He mocked him, yes, but beneath it was the begrudging respect one predator gives another. Still, his next attack would finish it, or so he thought. Before the flames could consume Will, another voice echoed through the cavern. Cold, sharp, and familiar. Stagnate. The goddess of death herself had appeared, halting Valakirka's strike. She declared, without a hint of shame, that Will was her enemy, and for that very reason, she refused to let the dragon kill him. Apparently, only she was allowed that honor. Rivalries between gods are complicated. Valakirka scoffed, amused at the irony. First Gracefield's intervention, now stagnates? Two goddesses circling around one paladin? He teased Will, calling him a lady killer. And honestly, who else could claim they had both life and death competing over them in the middle of a dragon fight? Curious, Valakirka asked Stagnate what kind of protection she intended to give Will. Her answer was simple, none. Will was still her enemy, and she wouldn't raise a finger to save him. But then she reminded the dragon where they were standing, on the sacred grounds of the Iron Country, where countless dwarves had fought their final stand. With a gesture, she summoned the spirits of those fallen warriors. From the darkness emerged an army of spectral dwarves, their armor rattling, their presence solemn. As they surround the dragon, Will's comrades return. Thankfully, they're not dead or ghosts. At the head of the army of spectral dwarfs stood none other than Orphan Gree, Rue's grandfather, the last king of the Iron Country. He approached Will with the gravity of a king and a warrior, holding out a legendary dwarven blade, Kaldon. This sword, passed down through generations, was now entrusted to Will. With solemn eyes, Orphan Gree told him to protect his grandson. Will accepted it with reverence, but some of the spirits were not stable. They had been consumed by Valakirka's flames, which burned body and souls. At risk of vanishing into nothingness, Gracefield intervened once more, guiding those souls, blessing them, and merging their essence with the living warriors. One by one, Will and his companions were strengthened, their bodies burning with new power, their resolve hardened by the weight of generations past. Before fading away, Orphan Gree shared a final moment with Rue, urging him to reclaim their homeland. Rue swore it, his voice steady, his will burning like the forges of old. That vow rekindled hope even in the heart of the fallen king as the spirit dissolved into the light and merged his essence with Rue. Now, bolstered by divine blessing and armed with the sword of legend, Will stood tall once more. His comrades, restored and renewed, rose beside him, warriors of both flesh and spirit united. Valakirka, ever the patient sadist, had allowed them this moment, not out of mercy, but malice. He wanted them filled with hope, their spirits soaring high, only so he could crush it all, watch them despair, and savor their downfall. But Will wasn't about to let that happen. Gripping Kaldon tightly, he readied himself. He had made a promise to Gracefield to face this monster and to kill him, and now, with everything behind him, he would see that promise through. The final assault began with no one holding back. Steel clashed, magic burned, and even the spectral dwarves lent their phantom blades to the fight. Will surged forward with a battle cry, using a spell to shield himself from the dragon's onslaught of flames, his blade Kaldon gleaming as it struck deep, finally carving into the dragon's monstrous scales. Valakirka reeled, an entire claw severed cleanly, his furious roar shaking the cavern like an earthquake. The others pressed in without hesitation. Manel's arrows flashed like streaks of light. Raystov's strikes pounded away, slicing the dragon's feet, and Gelreis and Rue rallied the undead dwarves to hammer the beast from all sides. The spectral soldiers fought with uncanny coordination, each swing and stab cracking through armor like scales. Blow by blow, they forced Valakirka to feel what it was like to be the one cornered. For a moment, it almost looked like victory was within reach. Almost. Backed into a corner, the dragon shifted tactics. The air grew hotter, the cavern trembling as Valakirka inhaled with terrifying force. He was preparing his most devastating attack, a full breath of flame, the kind that would not just melt stone, but erase everything in its path. Will could see what was about to happen. Any sane person might have backed away. Instead, Will surged forward, using his acceleration spell to close the gap in no time. The goddess had not chosen him for sanity after all. Ignoring the blistering heat, he leapt straight at the dragon's open maw, blade poised. And just as Valasurka unleashed his torrent of fire, Will drove Koldon down into his throat. The explosion of flame was cataclysmic. Will fell to the ground, and for one heartbeat he thought this was it, that he would perish with the dragon, burned away into nothingness as the dragon unleashed the attack. And maybe, in a grim sort of way, he was okay with that. To die taking the monster down wasn't the worst fate for a paladin, but Gracefield wasn't about to let him give up. Her voice reached him, calm yet commanding, urging him to stand and fulfill the promise he had made. That single reminder ignited what strength he had left. Summoning the last of his willpower, with no armor left on, he gripped his blade and pushed. With a final decisive thrust, the cursed blade overeater pierced the dragon's heart. The cavern filled with Valasurka's death cry, a roar so thunderous it seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. His massive body collapsed in a smoldering heap, and finally, at long last, silence. Will collapsed too, falling unconscious amid the wreckage. When he awoke, his companions were huddled around him, relief washing over their faces, and there, beside them, was the immense corpse of Valasurka. They turned to the dwarven spirits, thanking them for their courage and loyalty. Rue promised that their duty was fulfilled, their sacrifice remembered, and at last, the spectral soldiers faded, their long watch finally over. But even in the quiet aftermath, something felt different. Will flexed his hand against a nearby rock. It crumbled like dry clay under his grip. Something was definitely off. That's when Stagnate appeared, ever the master of poorly timed revelations. He explained that when Will slew the dragon, its flames and blood had literally fused with his body. Valasurka's essence was now interwoven with his very soul. In short, congratulations, Paladin, you're half-dragon now! Strong enough that ordinary weapons couldn't hurt him, but cursed enough that arrogance might allow the beast to take control. Stagnate, of course, looked absolutely delighted with this arrangement. Why bother forcing Will into submission when fate had already handed him such a gift? Gracefield naturally was less impressed. She offered her eternal rival a chance to change his ways, to join her instead. Stagnate chuckled at the idea, dismissing it as easily as one swats a fly. And then, because he couldn't help himself, he decided to stir up trouble. Stagnate mused aloud about seducing Will's future child. Yes, you read that right. She even wondered if she created a female echo. Would Will sire children with it? The remark made Gracefield's patience snap, her anger flaring bright enough to make even the goddess of death hesitate. Stagnate, unbothered, pointed out that Rhea Sylvia, the mother of demigods, had been doing this sort of thing since forever. With a smug grin, she faded away, revealing her true female form just long enough to confess a twisted affection for Will before vanishing into the shadows. With the gods gone, Gracefield turned back to the mortals. The dragon was dead, and now she would grant them one wish. Vindolfer stepped forward, his voice steady. He wished for their homeland to be freed of the miasma that had poisoned it for so long. The others agreed, and with Gracefield's blessing, a wave of light spread outward, purifying the Iron Country and even reaching the forests of Lothdor. When the party emerged from the mountains, Dinelin and a few elves ran into them. Relief poured across her face the moment she saw them alive. The elves soon joined in, celebrating not just their survival, but the cleansing of their lands. From the dragon's vast hoard, treasures were given freely to aid in rebuilding. Vindolfer vowed to restore the Iron Country to prosperity, while Menel prepared to return to his village and seek help, Dinelin insisting she would accompany him. Their next stop was the City of the Dead, where Gus awaited them. His reaction was, well, shock doesn't quite cover it. He had genuinely expected them to be dead, and now here they were strolling back in like it was just another Tuesday. But the old mage's sharp eyes quickly spotted the strange new current of mana flowing in Will's body. He identified it for what it was, a curse. Will, however, accepted it as his fate. They prayed at the graves of Marian blood, offering thanks before Gus made one final gesture of respect. He permitted Vindolfer to keep the weapons of his fallen comrades, the greatest honor he could give. And as for Koldon, Vindolfer insisted that Will should wield it. Arvangur had chosen him, and that choice was final. At last, the long journey home came to an end. When the villagers saw them return, carrying dragon scales and even one of Valasurka's horns as proof, the celebrations erupted instantly. News spread, the dragon was slain. Tomorrow, the feast will shake the village from end to end. B was already scribbling down lyrics for a song, determined to immortalize their tale. Even Anna was there at the port to see Raistov's safe return. The victory was sweet, but life soon returned to its rhythm. One day, Will came across a pair of young adventurers preparing to accept a job far above their level. With a knowing smile, he gave them advice. Take quests that match your strength, never hold back when investing in good equipment. And with that, he pressed a dagger into their hands, a blade with a story that stretched back to his father. Would you care to hear the story behind it? He asked with a small smile. Sit back, it's a long one. And so, The tale of the faraway paladin continued, not just in the clash of gods and dragons, but in the lessons passed down to the next generation.